We're apparently live according to what my little thing is telling me. I wanted to host this hangout tonight. It's now no longer Good Friday for I Am, but I wanted to have a look at something that I think we don't contemplate very often, unless we are actually within the Roman Catholic Church, where we have a calendar for doing this, and that is contemplating the Stations of the Cross. Now, maybe a foreign term to a lot of people, but most churches have around their walls images of each Station of the Cross, and in the run up to Easter, each week you can go and contemplate a different Station of the Cross with the priest or on your own. Sometimes it's groups, etc. And it makes you actually think about what happened. Now, what I've done is I have put a link in the side chat, and I am now going to attempt to find the YouTube link to put it underneath the actual live feed. Now, it's just a basic wiki article, and it will familiarise anybody who isn't familiar with the Stations of the Cross. Right, let's see if we can get this. I am hopeless at this, people. I really am. Last time I did this, I had to get Cliff to do everything for me. Right, let's pick up my wiki article now. Oh, come on. I'm hopeless. I am absolutely useless. Right, here we go. I've already got one joker in the chat saying, are you going to finally convert to Christianity, Fiona? Yeah, right. Thank you. I'm just going to... Right, I've put that in the chat. So, if we're looking at the Stations...
I find that comment kind of interesting, like, Catholicism isn't Christianity, right?
Yeah, that's what's going to happen, but we're not even going to get into that. Right, so the Stations of the Cross, now they've actually been rejigged. The traditional Stations of the Stations of the Cross included some that weren't considered biblical. For example, Veronica wipes the face of Jesus. Jesus falling for the first time, Jesus falling for the second time, Jesus falling for the third time. Now, these were specifically attested to in the Gospels, and so they brought out another bunch which sticks more to the biblical account, and these are the things that we should be considering in the run-up to Easter. And I'm just going to go through the list, and then we can go through them one at a time. So the first is Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. Second is Jesus is betrayed by Judas and arrested. The third is Jesus is condemned by the Sanhedrin. 4, Jesus is denied by Peter. 5, Jesus is judged by Pilate. 6, Jesus is scourged and crowned with thorns. 7, Jesus takes up his cross. 8, Jesus is helped by Simon to carry his cross. 9, Jesus meets the women of Jerusalem. 10, Jesus is crucified. 11, Jesus promises his kingdom to the repentant thief. 12, Jesus entrusts Mary and John to each other. 13, Jesus dies on the cross. And 14, Jesus is laid in the tomb. So that's the 14 Stations of the Cross. So we start off with number 1, Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. And I find that a very interesting passage for a whole number of reasons. One of the interesting ones is Jesus' request that if it's possible, let this cup pass. because he knew what was in store for him. And the other very interesting bit is that even his devoted disciples couldn't stay awake to guard him. And he's facing this. Your thoughts on it?
Well, the first thing that I was going to say is it just seemed a little odd that it's even included in the list, seeing as though he's not on the cross yet. I mean, I know some people's theology behind it, but yeah, it just seems weird.
It's looking at the whole sort of the run-up, the actual crucifixion, because it's not a pretty story.
It's most churches will have either on the left-hand side or the right-hand side the depiction of it either in some people have it in glass, some people have it in bronze or iron. Of this actually occurring. I mean, some people cut out the garden bit, but they'll have the Last Supper in some sort of representation. Then they'll have him being tried in some representation. Then they'll have him walking with the cross in some sort of representation, and then infallibly crucified, and then the rest of it. And then that bit will all be in one thing, and then his resurrection will be in another part.
Yeah. Some of them include the resurrections the 15th. The old, the traditional way started with Jesus is condemned to death. However, that was set in about the 17th century, and it continued on until I think PJ2 decided to change it.
Yeah. Am I wrong in thinking that the Garden of Gethsemane thing is about the sort of predestination? He knew it was coming.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, there are many people. Well, there's JT good.
Doesn't that add to the bravery, I suppose, or the sacrifice, which is the whole point of this? You know, that he knew it was coming and was prepared to do it anyway.
Yeah.
Well, it depends who you ask. I mean, most people who believe would say yeah. Most people who don't would say no. So it depends.
Well, I mean, I don't believe, but that's beside the point. I mean, I don't want to go off the subject, but my point of view is that that the whole God thing is a made-up idea. But I think that Jesus was probably real and believed what he believed, and that his followers deified him to fit a prophecy they already knew existed. But he was basically a radical preacher.
Yeah.
He wasn't interested in following the old doctrine of the Old Testament, what we now call the Old Testament, the Jewish way. He wanted to create a new way, which was a bit more progressive, and basically they didn't like him for it. So to bring that to the garden bit, knowing that this is how people felt about him and that he was risking everything, his life, he knew it was coming, and that's kind of the point of this.
Yeah. I mean, for the believer though, he knew it was coming for a long, long time. And yet he still went ahead with his teaching. Yes, that's bravery. But I think also that the humanity also shines through in asking that if it's possible, can this cup be passed from him? Because, we're saying Jesus is God. But he was, and this is where a lot of people run into major problems. We say he was fully God and fully human. Yeah. And the argument is always, you can't be 100% one thing and 100% the opposite. And while I see what they're trying to say, and this will be seen as a cop-out by many, it's one of the mysteries of faith. I mean, in a way, faith in itself can be a mystery.
You know, I was just thinking when you were saying that, because I was thinking about how Jesus, he knew he was going to be crucified, and yet you brought up that part where he prays to his Father, and for a second I was kind of like, wait a minute, if he knows that it's going to happen, why is he even bothering to pray to his Father to release it? That doesn't make any sense. But then it made me think of the fact that if he knew anything about the Israelite history, he would have known that there's plenty of times in the Old Testament where God said that he was going to do something, and yet one of his people went to God in prayer and petitioned, and a lot of times God would change his mind and grant what they said. So makes sense.
Yeah, and also, I mean, the human part of him knows this is not going to be a walk in the park, given what was going to be done. It's not going to be nice. It's going to be a horrific death. It's death by suffocation. And it's a horrendous way to go. So, and that's why I find the garden so interesting, and why I think it makes sense to start there. Because I think there's going to be mental suffering at that point. And also the fact that not one of the disciples was able to stay awake and be on guard.
I think not only that, also you got to start somewhere, and you can't just start with him being betrayed and arrested. You got to have a to be honest, I'm surprised the Last Supper isn't the place to start. But
yeah,
well, it is for some churches, because some churches do start at some variation of the Last Supper.
Oh, sorry, I just looked at the thing. It says the new way of the cross. The Last Supper is number 1.
It usually is. It usually does start that way. I mean, the most Reformed churches, it's the Last Supper is that way. I mean, I'm not sure if that's the same for Catholic churches. I think more here to the garden. They see like, or some people actually put Judas's, act of betrayal there first, and then, I don't know if Jade's talking or she's not.
I can't hear her if she is.
No, neither can I.
No, I was muted. I was busy opening a beer and some cheese puffs.
The other thing about the garden is the kiss from Judas.
I mean, I think that it's a very poetic, and I don't mean poetic as it's not true. I mean poetic in the fact that, like, there's one of the most, I'm not saying romantic, but one of the most like your friendly gestures we probably will associate with anybody, which is a kiss, and he does it to betray somebody. It's just like the ultimate slap in the face. I mean, even Jesus says it, that you betray me with a kiss. Even he's offended, and it's like, and I think that's what's the.
Yeah, see, I find that very interesting, because at the Last Supper, Jesus told Judas to go and do what he had to do. He knew what was about to happen. And without Judas, this chain of events wouldn't have been put into place. And I have to ask myself, I mean, we see Judas as the villain of the piece. But was he maybe the hero of the piece? Because the reason I ask that question is this, that when we get further into this, Peter didn't have enough faith in Jesus, and he denied him. You would need to be very, very convinced that the resurrection was going to happen to then go and betray Jesus. Was Judas the sole disciple with absolute faith in Christ, and so therefore was able to do what needed to be done?
Well, there are some people who hold to the doctrine that Judas was Jesus' most favourite one, because he was the one who did what needed to be done. You know, sort of like he did the ultimate thing of having to portray Jesus, who was a friend of his, who was somebody that he was a colleague, and all this sort of stuff. And I think that people now, because of the way that people look at Judas, and the way it's been associated with the word betrayer, they look at it from that sort of perspective. But it's the way I do, especially at this time of year, that that sometimes bravery is doing the wrong thing for the right reason. If that makes sense.
Yeah, because that's the question I have to ask myself. If it was me and I was asked to do that, would my faith be strong enough to say, well, I have to do this, but there's going to be a resurrection? How many of us would actually have the strength of faith to do that? And I think it's an interesting way to look at it.
If you were talking about, was somebody talking about Judas having faith?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought I heard. But here's a couple verses that I think I would disagree with that on. It's
yeah, no, that's fine.
In John chapter 6, you can look it up, verse 70 and 71. It says, "Then Jesus replied, 'Have I not chosen you 12? Yet one of you is a devil.' He meant Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, who one of the 12 was later to deliver him." So, I don't know. I think to say that a devil had faith in the Son of God seems a little out there for me.
Well, I don't know, because, you see, what was written down after the fact. And the question that I then have to ask is, were the people who were writing it down taking into account the fact that Judas was absolutely pivotal in the crucifixion? He was seen at the time as the villain of the piece.
Well, I don't know about that, Fiona, because the Greek word used for what he did, from what we know about the culture at the time, 30 shekels was the amount you paid. 30 gold pieces, silver pieces, was the price that you paid to have somebody arrested. And that basically that's what Jesus wanted to do. Basically, he was just the chosen one, and he's become marginalized because of that. And he again, maybe Jesus, because he kissed him on the cheek, and Jesus approached him. That's the way that people have been chosen to interpret it. But maybe that's just what he needed, something special. He thought, right, I'm going to shake everybody's hand, but I need the thing I did to Jesus to be special, to back him out as the person that they want. So I thought, right, I'm going to kiss it, and I think that's what maybe has twisted it. I mean, that's what I've read anyway.
It's difficult because there are so many different tales of what happened to Judas afterwards. I think there was one of the apocryphal Gospels has him living into his 50s, ending up fat and bloated. Another one has him hanging himself, and another one has him falling over and bursting asunder. And I think one of the ways that they're attempting to reconcile that is the fact that what they're saying is that the apocryphal version, where he lived on and became fat and corpulent, isn't true. But he did hang himself in the field, but then his rotting corpse fell off and burst asunder. Who knows?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think the people who want revenge probably would say that the one where he hung himself has been the most one, because there are some depictions, artistic depictions of him having his stomach cut. Actually, I think it's from the film Hannibal, where they talk about that particular piece, and I've seen a couple more as well. But me personally, I mean, I think that we shouldn't really recriminate the guy, because at most what he did was do what he had to do, or
Yes.
at very best, at very worst, at best, he was doing what he was asked to do. I mean, that's just the way I choose to see it. I
Yeah.
think I think seeing somebody deserve something, it's very bad, wrong, and I think it's very anti-Christian in my opinion. It goes against everything that Jesus was like seeing when he was on the way to the cross.
Did I hear right that he hung himself, and when did he hang himself?
It's supposed to be like a few days afterwards.
After the
After the crucifixion. After the crucifixion, yeah. He went and had himself and slit his belly open.
I mean, that kind of suggests that he felt guilty rather than the idea of, believing in the resurrection so much that he did the duty that was expected.
If the story's correct.
Indeed.
Yeah, that's the difficulty that we run into.
Yeah, because you think about it. If Judas hadn't betrayed Jesus, quote unquote, Jesus wouldn't have been crucified. All the prophecies wouldn't have been fulfilled.
Yeah.
And maybe Judas. I mean, we really don't know, because what we know is from the survivors, so to speak. We know from the later writers what they thought of it and how they viewed this. I mean, for all we know, somebody else hung Judas.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know what happened. And even if Judas did betray Christ, and even if Judas did hang himself, you don't know if he was repenting at the time. I think it was Gary says very unchristian to like demonize Judas.
Yeah. I'm going to drop the link to this Hangout because I've got people asking for a link, so I think I'll drop the link. But I want to reiterate here, right? This discussion is about where believers are coming from. It is not a case of this is true, no, it's not. This is true. We're not getting into a fight about that. That's not what this is about. It's to try just to explain what this means to believers. So I'll get my link, and I will now drop the Hangout link into, if I can find the tab. There we go. Link to join.
And let's not forget, there are contradictions in the New Testament, but most people think that those contradictions are not substantive.
No.
How many people were at the tomb? Is that really important?
No.
So you have to, if you're going to look at this from a Christian point of view, you have to realize that every single word isn't gospel, so to speak. Well, that these are the views that everybody had a different view. If you have 10 people watch an accident, you're going to get 10 different versions of the accident. And the important part is usually what comes from all those different versions, the substance of the story, rather than minor details. Who was with who and when. Yeah.
That is the difficulty in trying to sort through the accounts. I'm just typing something in here.
Well, the thing is that when I did history a little bit at school, they basically did all this bullshit that I hear from people online of, well, it says this and therefore it can't be true, was never talked about. It's what does the account itself tell you, and if there's another account, what does that tell you? What do they agree on and what do they disagree on, and what does the stuff they disagree on is it important? Because you basically go, what does it tell you and what doesn't it tell you? Like, for example, we did, I think it's like 3 accounts on the invasion of Germany, Poland by Nazi Germany, and there were 3 accounts that were totally different because they were from 3 totally different points of view. So does that mean that the Nazis didn't invade Germany then? It's totally crap argument. If you're going to use history, use the way that historians view it. Don't use your own.
I think that's a really good point, Gary. And a lot of the people who are, trying to look at the Bible literally don't have the kind of education or to realize, you can't, like you said, you have to look at it like history. You have to look at it from a historical perspective. You have to realize that you're looking at it from the point of view of different people. They wrote down their own accounts, but not only that, they probably borrowed from each other's accounts, because same stories were told. If you, again, if you see an accident and you talk to a friend of yours and you say, "Wow, did you see that guy was going about 60?" and your friend goes, "Well, no, I don't think they were going 60. I think they were probably going a little less. I think it was probably 50." And you stop and think about it and go, "Yeah, I guess you're right. They were going 50." So you've now changed your position because somebody else has given you information that makes you think. Yeah, it's not like you're stealing from somebody else's opinion. It's just that you know that all the different apostles were talking to each other. And probably even, for all we know, sending letters. Because remember, this was Rome, the great Roman roads, and people like Paul had, scribes. And one of the things we're discovering from the Oxyrhynchus, which I admit is like later in the century, are all the early Christians were writing letters to each other and saying things like, "I'm missing this part of John. Could you have your scribe copy it down and send it to me?" So you have this I can't think of the right, cross-pollination going on. And that's why you're going to see any historical text, any historical evidence is going to have some similarities. And sometimes the similarities will conflict because somebody is borrowing somebody else's voice because they say it better. We all do that. Anyone who's ever written a paper in college realizes you get to a point where, I'm just going to have to quote this guy because I can't say this any better. But at one time, and excuse me, Freddie, get out of there right now. At one time, sorry about that. Freddie's my cat, for those of you who don't know. At one time, they didn't use quotes. And I think Gary can affirm this. I don't know when, but I know that, they didn't quote. They didn't use quotes. You would just add the other person's, what the other person said onto what you said. So, of course, it looks like there's two different voices writing. And that's in English literature or English history. So, yeah.
Yeah, that does sort of confuse things a bit when you're trying to sort of sort out all the various versions. So whatever happened to Judas, I think it wasn't nice.
And that doesn't include translational problems.
But yeah, there is that too. Right, that was so we've covered the garden and the betrayal. Condemned by the Sanhedrin. So on you go.
Oh, go! Just as you said that, I realized you were going to talk, so I took a drink of beer. What I was going to say is, again, you're right. Cliff is absolutely right about translation problems. One of the things I try to point people to is English. And it wasn't that long ago, just a few hundred years, when we had Middle English. And I suggest people today try to go read Chaucer. And understand what it said. And a lot of it is understandable, and some of it isn't. They even have a letter that we don't use anymore, that S thing, But then you go back a little bit further and try to read something in Old English. But it's all English. So think about when the Bible was written in Koine Greek. I'm just talking New Testament here. I'm not even going to go into the Hebrew and Aramaic and what have you. But just think of when the Koine Greek was written. And think of the difficulties of people couple of 1,000 years later trying to translate this language, which has changed and evolved. And a good parallel is looking at Old English, because Gary, when was Beowulf written? Just roughly, but it was like 900 years ago, wasn't it?
119 maybe. 190 is what we the first one. I think it's even before.
Oh, was it? Right. So I think that's probably a good parallel. If you want to look at the difficulties in translating Koine Greek, from to modern Greek even, look at the difficulty in translating Beowulf to modern English. Beowulf is completely unreadable to most of us. And I don't know if Koine Greek changed, if Greek changed as much as English did, because, of course, we had the Norman invasion and all that. But it will give you an idea of how difficult this can be. for the layperson. I mean, it gives the layperson an idea of how difficult it can be.
I just looked it up for you. Somewhere between the 8th and the 11th century, so I don't even know that.
Yeah.
Difficult to narrow it down.
Well, I think it's finally put into print, or whatever it's called, into. Was Cliff left? Sorry.
Oh.
Looks like he dropped. He'll probably be
Yeah,
back.
dropped.
Yeah,
So
he'll be back.
I want to try and get this back onto the stations,
Yeah, sure.
and we have reached the Jesus is condemned by the Sanhedrin. So that after the debacle in the garden and the various fixing of ears, Jesus is dragged in front. Well, there's a few differences in the Gospels, but he's definitely dragged in front of the Sanhedrin, which was a bit of a sort of, on the spot gathering. One of them, I think, which Gospel is it? John has him taken to the father-in-law of Caiaphas. Caiaphas was the high priest at the time. Looking for sort of a bit of backup in his actions, as if they weren't actually quite sure of what they were doing.
Yeah.
And Jesus was basically tried in front of them and beaten. And he said very little in his own defense. You say that I am. He doesn't try to defend himself.
Well, Fiona, the thing is that I find it quite, and maybe you find this quite funny. Well, I do. Is that the fact that the trial that Jesus went through is very similar, or there are similarities to the trials that the Triple R gang did to certain individuals.
You announced that it's triple arse.
Yeah.
No, but you know what I mean. Like,
Yeah.
they basically held show trials where they tried people, whether they showed up or not, and then found them guilty basically of whatever tragedy they could. Now, the fact that they didn't see the irony in this just tells me. I mean, I called it at the time blasphemic. The only reason I took part was to call it blasphemic, because of this very reason, that Jesus himself was pushed into a show trial. He basically was put before Caiaphas, and I think in certain versions, I think it was Herod as well. And basically, the top thing they had was to try to basically trump up charges to kill him on. And I find it very funny that the parallels are pretty uncanny to what the Triple R gang were doing.
Yeah. And I think what I find quite telling about this is the fact that Jesus didn't mount a defence. Because, I mean, he knew what was going to be happening. It wouldn't matter what he said. It had to happen.
Hadn't he already had sort of feelings that he was going against what the doctrine was and they hated him for it? So he kind of already knew what they were going to be saying.
It was because what they were saying to him was, are you the Christ? Because you see, that would be seen as a blaspheming for somebody to claim to be the Messiah, if obviously the Sanhedrin didn't think he was. So it's condemnation based on opinion.
I was so tempted to pull the Life of Brian for a second. He's not the Messiah. He's a very naughty boy.
Yes. It's, and I think just looking at the gospel accounts there, where we've got Caiaphas, who is the high priest at the time, and yet John hasn't been taken to the son-in-law of Caiaphas, who was the former high priest, as if Caiaphas just wasn't sure. He needed to be told, you are doing the right thing. And given what they were planning to demand as the punishment for the crime, and given that, you know, that it's a bit of an irreversible one, a death sentence, the fact that they weren't that sure and wanted a bit of backup from his father-in-law is very strange. Why would the high priest need backup from his father-in-law?
Was his father-in-law someone of note?
He was the ex-high priest. This is John's Gospel that we're with at this point.
If that's the case,
appears in John's Gospel.
If that's the case, and you know your parents tend to be a bit more seasoned and knowledgeable than you are, then maybe it was his, his father was more versed in this kind of law than he might be.
Yeah.
Also, it could just be he wanted not necessarily a second opinion, but he wanted backup in order to make sure that this guy that was, doing the wrong thing was, done to death for it.
Yeah. And you have to remember that when this was going on, at the same time, we've got the fourth station. Jesus is denied by Peter. Because as Jesus was being tried, that is when somebody said to Peter, aren't you one of the guys that was hanging about with him? And Peter denied him. So while, and this is the really strange thing, we have these followers of Christ who couldn't stay awake in the garden to keep an eye out for him. And now we've got one who denies him because he denies knowing him because he's worried about his own skin. And yet Jesus had already said to him that he was calling him Petros, a rock. That's why we call him Peter. And on this rock I will build my church. So what that makes me wonder is how much faith had Peter put in the words of Jesus to him about building his church on him, if he thought that by admitting that he had been one of the guys going about with him, that he was going to end up being killed as well. Because if that was going to happen, then what Jesus had said wouldn't be true. Do you see what I'm maybe expressing this very badly?
Yeah.
That if Peter had full faith in Jesus Christ, then he wouldn't have been afraid to admit that he had been with him and was one of his followers.
But then again, wasn't he already given a more important job at hand?
Yeah, but if he'd had faith, the job still would have happened. That's the thing.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
If he had full faith in what
thing
Christ had said to him,
Right.
he wouldn't have
What
been
happened
worried.
is, at that moment, Peter just became very human and frightened.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a child, this was one of my favorite parts, because it showed that even St. Peter the rock, on whom Jesus was going to build his church, even he had clay feet. And that was like a promise to, all of humanity, or a point to all of humanity that, you can fail too.
Yes.
But you're still very important. You still have your place to play in the scheme of things. That Peter was just as human. And that was, again, part of the things I loved. Peter, of all people, was just human at that moment. Just like when Jesus asked, Father, can this cup, or I forget the exact quote, pass before me. This is showing the humanity of Jesus and the humanity of Peter, because he probably thought up until that minute, oh yeah, I have faith, I have faith, I have faith. Oh no, I wasn't with him. Oops.
Yeah. We all stumble.
Mm-hmm. Even Peter.
Yeah.
As I said, that's why I really liked this as a child, because it was, wow, if Peter can fail, anybody can fail and still be beloved by Jesus.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the bits that gives you a bit of hope for yourself. Because you know that having been human and asking if the cup can be passed from him, and then we have the example of Peter as well. If both Jesus and Peter have said those things, then there's still hope for the rest of us. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and as I said, that was why this, and Jesus saying, Father made his cup. I can never remember the exact quote. Were my favorite parts when I was learning all this in school, because I went to Catholic school, for those of you who don't know, because that was not only the humanity in the two men, but the promise that even if we fail, we can still have a place in God's kingdom.
Yeah. We go on to Jesus is judged by Pilate, and that's rather interesting, because Pilate can find no fault.
But isn't there something about him wanting to screw over the court? I can't remember. I remember hearing something about that sometime. He didn't really care about the Jews in their court, because he was a Roman officer.
Yeah, because Jesus was accused of a religious crime, which was blasphemy. Pilate wasn't really interested in that side of things, was he?
No. Nothing to do with me. That's your religion, not mine.
Yeah.
Yeah, but wasn't it the... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, on you go.
Okay, I was going to say, because basically the Jewish priests were trying to pass the buck.
Yes.
And that's what this was about. And Pilate looked at this and was like, not in my bailiwick. This is a religious crime. This isn't a civil crime. Why are you bringing it to me? And, of course, the reason they're bringing it to them is they didn't want to touch it.
Yeah, they wanted it done, but they didn't want to dirty their own hands.
Which is interesting if you think about it, because did they believe it, or were they just hedging their bets, whatever you want to call it? Sort of saying, well, what if this guy is real, right?
Yeah.
Well, they were cowards. They were afraid of the reaction, I think, if they condemned him.
Mm-hmm. And the thing is, could Pilate have chosen to release Jesus?
Well, he did.
No, he released Barabbas and handed Jesus back.
He left it up to the people.
Yeah. But this is the thing. Could Pilate have chosen?
Yeah,
to release Jesus?
I think he would have offended his Jewish allies. It was a political powder keg. If he would have overruled what the ruling religious elite wanted in Palestine, then it would have created a lot more animosity, caused a lot more problems for him to deal with later down the road. He's being a politician.
Yeah, so he's been handed a poisoned chalice. And he's going to be damned if he does and damned if he doesn't.
Well, Jesus even said that the one who handed him over to Pilate would be the one with the greatest condemnation.
Mm-hmm. I do find Pilate's role in this very... I think I was going to use the word weak. Because of this not wanting to upset the religious high hegions. But then again, if you know, it was a force of occupation.
Well, and he's not guiltless. I mean, this shows where his loyalties, where his values lied. I mean, he cared more about his political career than he did about the life of an innocent man.
Mm-hmm. And of course, we've also got the those who went through the crowd to egg everybody on to ask for Barabbas to be released.
I remember in church one time somebody was talking about the name of Barabbas, how similar it was to Jesus actually. When you look at what the name actually meant, you know, Barabbas, son of my father, the son of the father, Barabbas.
Mm-hmm.
His first name was also Jesus, I believe. Somebody told me that. This was like 20 plus years ago when I used to go to church, and they said what Barabbas, when he was in the holding cell, when they figured out, you know, with archaeology where the holding cell was, where the trial was taking place, was that when Jesus was being interrogated by Pilate in front of the crowd, that all he heard from his cell was Jesus, which was his first name, and crucify him.
Mm-hmm.
So Barabbas was thinking that the crowd was hollering for his blood. He said, well, what of Jesus? And they said, Jesus, crucify him. Or no, they hollered Barabbas. So he heard Barabbas, and then he heard crucify him. Because they were yelling for Barabbas to be released. Barabbas couldn't hear that part. They just heard the crowd yell, Barabbas.
That's interesting.
And then when Pilate, the voice that Barabbas couldn't hear, asked him, well, what of Jesus? And then the crowd said, crucify him, real loud. So all Barabbas heard was, Barabbas, crucify him. And then next thing he knew, he was being released. I have a feeling that he probably became a believer.
Possibly. It's one of those bits of the story that, I mean, if you ever go and watch, I think everybody's seen it, Jesus Christ Superstar, and you can't help but thinking, you know, you follow it as if you don't know the story and saying, oh, please listen, please listen. But it had to happen that way. We wouldn't have had a crucifixion otherwise.
Yeah, it had to happen that way. I mean, Jesus even said so early in his ministry, when him and Peter were speaking privately. I suppose it was privately, and then Peter tried to talk him out of it. Mm-hmm. And Jesus said, "Get thee behind me, Satan," because at that moment, Peter was possessed by Satan. Satan didn't want Jesus to go to the cross.
Well, I'm not quite sure about that one. I need to think about it. I need to have a good think about that one. I was going to move on to the next station.
Would destroy his power over humanity. In the long run. It would have ruined what he had going on. He didn't want that. So Satan tried to offer Jesus all the kingdoms of the earth when he tempted him, because he wanted Jesus to stop, you know, being this righteous guy and get on his team.
Sorry, I thought you were talking actually at the time of the trial and etc. But no, sorry, I've got you now. I always lost the start of what you're saying.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that was me. I was probably having a brain fart.
I I'm sorry, but
No. The next station, and this is where we're really getting into this now, is Jesus is scourged and crowned with thorns. So I want to really have a think about what that means. What was actually done to him. And from what I've been able to glean just from reading, that he was scourged with a whip that had lead tips.
Yeah.
That was the standard. And that's horrible. You know, whichever way you slice it, that is horrible.
Yeah. Well, because apparently that's the way that the Romans would do their crucifixions, is that they would whip somebody so that when they were up there, they wouldn't be up there long because for long as they may do, because once you skirt the skin, blood starts coming out of it. That's one of the reasons they did other things that isn't really talked about in the Bible, like for example, punch the lung with a spear, because that would hasten the process a lot. So it still wasn't good. It's a horrible way to go, I think.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people do have a sort of a mental image of, in historical dramas, when you see somebody, they're at sea and somebody is getting, was it?
Cat of Nine Tails.
Yeah. And so they get this shirt torn and then they get whipped. And then they lie in their tummy for a few days and that's it. I think what was used in those days was designed to almost flay you.
yeah, rip the flesh right off you.
Yeah, it was.
Flagellate is the word.
Yes.
Yeah, it's,
Did Mel Gibson capture that imagery pretty good from his?
I hate that film.
I rather liked it. I mean, I didn't like
I
it.
hate it.
You hated it.
I thought
Yeah.
it was gory.
No.
I-
It was basically it's like one of those Saw movies, but with Jesus. I'm sorry, I just no.
I don't know how it could
Yeah.
not move someone, because when I was watching it, man, I was like, I practically had my head, down the whole time. It's like I couldn't. I mean, I don't even have words. I think Mel Gibson did a fantastic job.
I haven't watched it. And I'll tell you for why. Because I don't like gore. I get very, very uncomfortable.
But there is one magic moment in it, and I will defend it on this one. There is one moment that I think that is great, where Jesus falls to the ground with the cross, and then you see from Mary's perspective
Yeah,
him
I
as a
love
little kid falling down
that. Almost had me scared.
as a kid, and her pick her up. It's a really good moment, but it's like one of those moments. It's a bit like having a fly. It's like having a diamond in a pile of shit. It's sort of nice, but it's the rest of the film just ruins it for me.
Well, it moved me. It moved me.
No, I'm not saying the rest of the film should move you. I'm just saying that particular moment is very moving. And I'm saying that's just one of the moments that, if there were more moments like that, I'd actually like it.
Yeah.
Well, it was actually that I didn't mention it before, but that was my favorite part of the movie. Is when Mary ran up to Jesus and said that I'm here, and showed her saying that, even though that's not in the Gospels, but it does show, and then it shows her where she's saying the same thing when he's a little boy trying to learn how to walk, and he falls down, and that moved me some of I grew up with very cruel parents, and so that moved me on that level, and it just showed that just how lovely Mary was.
Yeah, I was going to ask. I never saw that movie because I read the reviews, and frankly, I'm not big on gore.
It's not any more gore. It's not as gory as some of the movies you've probably already seen.
Yeah, but see, I don't watch any kind of gory stuff. I it's not that I have a weak stomach, because I grew up watching lots of horror movies and reading Tales of the Crypt magazine, so it's just that I don't particularly care for it. But one of the things I want to ask, since you guys have both seen it, does Mel Gibson follow the modern Stations of the Cross, which is what we're talking about now, or the old Stations of the Cross, which included... huh?
I have no idea. I'm not Catholic.
Well, the old Stations of the Cross included things that were tradition but had no biblical background. For instance, Saint Veronica, who wiped Jesus' face.
That's in it.
And you already mentioned Mary meeting Jesus, right?
No, there's a bit where this is in the film. Actually, it should be on YouTube somewhere. The scene. It's where Jesus is carrying the cross, and he falls to the ground with the cross, and then you cut to Mary, who sees him as a kid doing the same thing, falling to the ground, and her helping him. So it's like a parallel sort of thing. It's actually a really magic moment.
I don't. That's not in the Gospels that I've read. I don't know if it's in any of the Catholic versions of the Gospels.
No, it may or may not be in the Apocrypha. I don't know, but Mary meeting Jesus and Veronica wiping Jesus' face are both in their tradition. They come from tradition, and they are in the old-fashioned Stations of the Cross, which have been revamped because, like the Pope said, there's no biblical basis for this. So what we're talking about now are the ones that are biblical basis. But Mel Gibson is a traditionalist Catholic. His father even rejects the current popes because they reject everything after Vatican II. So I just wondered, and it sounds to me like Mel Gibson is following the old script.
I would guess that that's probably what he did, because I've read a few things, a few commentaries, how Mel Gibson was criticized by this movie, mainly on the grounds of his Catholicism. And the fact is, the only gory scene that I recall from that movie is the part where Jesus is getting beaten, and I think that is very historically accurate.
Yeah, but that scene goes on for about an hour, because he doesn't get beaten. He gets whipped. He gets pushed in the face about 40 times, at least that I counted.
And I really don't see a problem with that, because just out of respect for Jesus, come on. I mean, the guy actually went through it. So I don't really see a problem with people, really talking about it, because that had to suck. I mean, come on, it had to really, really seriously suck.
No, I'm not saying it didn't. I'm just saying, right? I mean, like, I'm sorry, but I just found it exploitative as hell. Like, it's like, it's like, as I said, it's like Hostel or Saw or like.
Can you imagine? Can you imagine? I don't want to go all. Well, I don't want to say that either. But so I was going to say it the way I thought originally. But can you imagine being one of Jesus' disciples, and then all of a sudden the shock of seeing him treated this way? I mean, it would have to be unbelievable. Just unbelievable.
Think about being his mother.
Yeah.
Yes.
Think about being his mother.
Yes. Yeah. That to me
would probably be darn near suicidal.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be the hardest part. I can't even imagine it.
Yeah.
To see someone go through that, and that's your child.
Yes.
That was the babe at your breast. That was the little boy who came to you with the treasures he found.
Especially back in them days, where a mother got her status and her glory in life, and even to some aspects afterlife, depending on how great your husband and your children are. That was her whole identity.
I don't think that would have crossed their mind, to be perfectly honest.
Not at that time, no.
No, I don't think Mary was thinking of her status.
Well, I didn't mean it that way.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I know you didn't, David.
Yeah. It's I said earlier on that when you become a mother, because of the release of hormones, etc., it's just the way we're designed. And because of these hormones, the maternal instinct kicks in. And you have this absolutely overwhelming feeling that you will do anything to protect this smelly, squalling mess that's lying in front of you. And this smelly, squalling mess is the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. That's just our physiology. That's what the hormones do. That's what happens with mothers. And that never goes away. Never. And it's one of those absolutely overwhelming emotions that you have no control over and you're stuck with for life.
Well, unless the woman in question has a mental problem.
Yeah. And so I think knowing that this is in store for your child and living with that and then seeing it actually happening, I just can't imagine how awful that would have been.
And like I said, it would be greatly magnified for the women of them ancient times, simply because their whole identity, their whole reason for living is to care for their family.
Yeah.
You
and
know,
that was a
they're
firstborn
very
as well.
family-oriented culture. It was a very
Yeah.
family, even though the women per se didn't really have that much of a voice.
Mhm.
They were able to like influence behind the scenes.
Mhm.
You know what the men folk would do, and so they had a lot of say. When it
Yeah.
was appropriate for them times.
And
And
we're concentrating on the suffering of Christ, but we have to remember that those around were suffering as well because of what they were seeing and
Yeah,
because of the relationship with him.
yeah.
And the other thing that always strikes me, maybe because I'm a wuss, is that after being scourged like that, with the flesh lifted from his back, he's then got to carry a cross on what is, in fact, the raw meat of his back.
Now, is the Catholic version of the story the same as the Protestant version, where Simon had to help him carry the cross because he kept dropping it?
Yeah.
I'm amazed that he could even walk. 'Cause
Yeah.
After watching Mel Gibson's account, I don't even know how he didn't die. I mean, getting beat like that. I don't.
Yeah. Well, I suppose the rationale behind all of this is by the time they get to where they're going to crucify the person, they're not exactly able to put up much of a fight. Just about half dead as it is, maybe more.
Yeah, I could see that. I could see that you'd want them weakened so that they wouldn't feel inclined to resist what was happening to them.
Mm-hmm.
I could see the reasoning behind that.
I wanted to bring this up. Well, two things I want to bring up. First of all, one thing that Fiona said about being scourged is, we have a lot of movies that have given us a wrong idea of someone being whipped. If you look at history, you realize a lot of people didn't survive whippings.
Yeah.
No.
So it's not the way it looks like in the movies where the big strong guy endures the whipping and then goes on and he's okay. No, a lot of people didn't survive, and whippings were fairly common on naval ships, and people died from them. 25 strokes was a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing I wanted to mention is my understanding, and you guys can weigh on this, especially those who've researched this, is Jesus didn't exactly carry the cross. He carried the cross piece to the cross.
Yeah.
The main part of the cross was already there. The vertical part.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, because what they would do is that they make you basically take the vertical beam with you, which is like the third you'll slap in the face if you were.
Yeah.
It's like right, we're going to kill you, but we're going to make the thing that's going to kill you up with you. It's not like so. And that's what I mean. Everyone says, "Oh, Monty Python is really funny." That's one bit that isn't funny, because even if you don't believe in the story of Jesus, it is crucifixion was an actual thing that actually happened.
Mm-hmm.
It was it was like people. This is how people in Rome died. This is the way that they actually died. And I personally don't find that funny. I mean, maybe people do find it funny, and maybe I'm just a humorous piece of jerk. But maybe, it's like making jokes about the guillotine. Sort of like you just don't go there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was because of our television rating systems and our movie rating systems. There were certain images, certain types of images you couldn't show, and because they didn't want people to be shocked and offended and then lose views, and so they had to really downplay the bad stuff and the graphic stuff and sexual content, things like that. And I'm not too familiar with the European and the English versions of entertainment, but I think America pretty much had the lead for quite a few decades, and then they kind of copied us, how we did things, and then developed their own ways of doing it afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
Is that how it happened? That you had a similar rating system as we did, so you could show a lot of graphic stuff? Am I off base on that? I'm just guessing.
We just have time zones. So before 9 o'clock, you're not allowed to show it.
You show blood and gore and graphic stuff in your movies, until recently.
But not until a certain time.
Yeah.
But to get back to the crucifixion, so is this your understanding too, Gary, that the up and down piece was already in the ground, and the criminals, including Jesus, who was considered a criminal, they just carried the cross piece with them?
The vertical beam with them, yes.
Yeah, the beam, yeah.
Actually...
was the upright already upright, or was it lying on the ground?
Because basically, what it was is that that piece, the vertical piece, was quite long.
Mm-hmm.
So it would take them quite a while to give the person both pieces to get it up there. So what they would do is to give them the vertical beam. I mean, they'd take that. I mean, usually what they do is that they measure the person, your arm width, and then they basically make it to measure and put it up basically. They would make it more or less, if they're a very tall person, their arm width would be very much. Sometimes it would be quite hurtful if they didn't.
Well, if you think about it, it's going to take a while to erect the up and down part, which is actually the vertical part, the up and down piece. And it has to be sunk into the ground, and it has to be stabilized. So, from what I understand of history, that was done ahead of time.
Yep.
And it was just the cross piece that was carried by the criminal. Yeah.
What changes it from other cultures that did crucifixions? Because there were other cultures like the Babylonians and the Persians that did it. Not the Persians, sorry. Babylonians, I think it was somebody else, I can't exactly remember who did it. I think it's two others. The way they did it, it was like on the Babylonian side, it was like a X, X-shaped cross. It was like this shape.
That's
sorry,
what I thought.
I'll type it across like the letter X-shaped cross.
Right.
That's the way they did it, and there's actually depictions of that. And the Romans sort of inverted it because they thought that was a little bit weird, and the Babylonians would spear you in the middle of it, whereas the Romans would spear you before to hasten the death. I mean, that's the reason why, if you look at most Roman Catholic depictions of Christ, there's a big massive red scar on his, I'm going to say it's his right hand side, left hand side.
Oh, we're going to come to that. Don't you worry, we're coming to that.
We're going to get there.
Oh yeah, and I've got a very specific reason for getting
I
there.
didn't know there was a difference between the different cultures' crucifixion. I guess it was all. I considered it all the same.
No, I think one lot comes up with one thing, and then somebody else tries to refine it to make it even horribler. If horribler is ever even a word.
It isn't. But not only that, sometimes they will create ways to make it better, and sometimes that better has nothing to do with the person who's doing the dying, and everything
Yes.
to do with the people that are doing the killing part. And a simple example of that is hanging. The British mechanised hanging people. That they basically they did it in a scientific method by finding out that the weight. If you drop it too far, and someone doesn't weigh very much, they can just be hanging there for ages, wriggling about, and that makes people uncomfortable. But if it's if it's not enough drop, or they're too light, it leaves that. And if they're too heavy, or the drop is too long, it can yank the head off.
That's right, yeah.
To clear up. So they basically scientifically mechanized it so they would weigh the prisoner or the condemned, and they would say, okay, based upon this measurement and this scale, you need that amount of rope. Scary, but
It's out of interest, totally off topic. I heard that when they hanged women, they put on big plastic pants because when there was the jerk, the uterus actually fell out.
ooh,
Yeah, I know. I don't know how true that is. But I just thought I'd throw that in there.
just for lols.
Yeah, just threw it in there as you know how you go through life and your brain collects an awful lot of absolutely useless information. Well, now that I've been able to throw that out there and show that I know it, I can now forget it and leave space for something else.
I don't think
Because
the
I'm
memory
running out of
quite
space.
works that way. It's not like a hard drive.
Shut up, mine does.
You've got a hard drive that's malfunctioning,
Yeah.
is it?
Well, one thing I learned from church when I went to church, and believe it or not, I have learned quite a few things from my times in church. But they told me that Jesus and most of the people, well, I don't know why I say most, but all of the people who were crucified in the nude. They didn't have loincloths or whatever you see in the movies. That's just for the movies.
Yeah.
Because you can't show that sort of thing. It's to humiliate the person being crucified and the people who might think what they did was a good idea, or going out in any kind of, I'm going to go out and blaze of glory kind of mentality. No, you won't. We're going to display you on the side of the road, completely nude, beaten, and dying, in the sun, for the crows to pick at. Is not going to be a glorious thing at all. So
that's what the scourging and the crowning with thorns was to do with. That's to do with.
I'm talking about people who would happen to walk by and look up and they see this half dead, dying thing, moving without even the decency of having something to cover up their genitals.
Oh yeah, all these kinds of things, were designed to remind people this is what's coming for you if you don't follow the rules that we've set out for you.
And this should tell people, especially people that believe, how much Jesus was willing to go through in order to save us, because he loves us. That tells you just to what extent that he was willing to go to. There was no limit to what he was going to go through to save people.
Yeah. And it's not just that, but I mean, there is going to be further humiliation when you consider the mechanism of death, but we'll get to that a wee bit later. So he's taken up his cross, and we know he can't manage it, and he's helped by Simon, one person who stepped out and decided to help him to carry the cross. I mean, and those who were crucifying him were happy for that to happen, because if Jesus was struggling to carry it, it was going to take longer for them to get to what I suppose the bloodthirsty among them would call the juicy bits. Sadly. I wonder how many of us would have said, "We'll help you carry the cross." How many of us would have just stood back and not want to get involved?
Wasn't I might have to refresh my memory of the biblical account, but I seem to, at least Hollywood depicts Simon as being forced to carry the guy's cross. I don't know if anybody remembers the specifics there.
Mm-hmm. That is always. Because we don't know exactly what was said to him, and whether he was forced or whether he offered. But I think, let's put it this way, it's a case of somebody asks for a volunteer to step forward and everybody takes one step back, leaving one poor sod standing out in front. And, to actually get involved in that, it must have been a very unpleasant experience.
Well, actually, I just found it for you. It's let's see. Matthew chapter 27, verse 32 says, "As they were going out, they met a man from Cyrene named Simon, and they forced him to carry the cross."
They forced him. Right.
At least that's the NIV rendering.
Yeah, because sometimes it can be hard to know, given who it is, or given that we don't actually know who was retelling this for it to be written down, how much of their own personal colouring went into it. I mean, I'm not doubting the events. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is it can be difficult to know just how much personal opinion went into the specific words being used. But if you were standing in that crowd and watching the cross being carried with great difficulty, what would you have done?
Well, I don't think it was a matter of choice personally, because I keep picturing a Roman soldier seeing Jesus dropping this cross, and and he's like, I want this thing to get it on with it, because I got other things I want to do for the day. I've been in the military, I know how we think, and so he would look at the crowd, see some big burly guy there, and all he had to do was put his hand on his sword and say, "Hey, I need you to carry this cross." What's the guy going to do? Say no? Because this Roman soldier obviously killed people and not had a difficult time doing it. Probably enjoyed it. So
you see, I don't think I could have been part of the crowd lining the route. I couldn't.
Well, back in them days, there was, we got this romantic view of how people responded to Jesus, but you can look as far back as our Western times, in America. When there was a hanging, it was like a concert came to town. It was like the circus came, So you see someone being paraded, there's someone being paraded, or three criminals being paraded down, and you knew somebody that they harmed or something, or you heard about or something. You want to see the show. It's like a show. It was like a parade.
Yeah. You see, I just couldn't do that.
That was the mentality of the people back then.
I think it's because I've got a good imagination, and I find it all too easy to imagine myself in their position.
The advantages of growing up in the 20th century, and now it's the 21st century. But we've had the advantage in our sensibilities being cultivated by years of development, where we have better sensibilities and more empathy, most of us anyway, on an average level of, not being for unnecessary cruelty.
Mm-hmm.
And so we grew up with that in our mentality, in our psyche. So and they probably, unless it's family, they probably have very mixed loyalties. Unless it's family or somebody they feel close to or somebody they're in connection with, like somebody of their country or something. But people, for the most part, if they didn't know you from Adam, only heard about you, they really didn't care if you lived or died.
Mhm. And the next part that we're going to get to is that Jesus meets the women of Jerusalem. And they weep for him. It's found in Luke 23, 28 to 31, where Jesus turned to them as he's struggling up the hill with Simon carrying the cross for him. Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For behold, the days are coming when they will say, blessed are the barren, and the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never gave suck. Then they will begin to say to the mountains, fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. For if they do this when the wood is green, what will happen when it's dry? That seems to be a very strange thing to say.
Well, isn't that a reference to the apocalypse?
Well, what I'm asking is, why is Jesus saying this to the women who are weeping when they see him?
Well, okay. Another thing I happen to have learned in church in many of our discussions is that back then they had what they call professional mourners.
Mm-hmm.
So they were like, what they would do is they would get the crowd worked up, lament the passing of the dead. Basically, they were, I guess, in some cases this would apply, where you got these professional mourners that would try to get the crowd, worked up to where they would all start crying and stuff, especially those that knew him or heard of him, and so it could be something along those lines. So he's like, hey, look, you're really not that sincere, but you're going to be.
So I think Fiona, you were asking why he said,
Mm-hmm.
don't weep for me. I think because let me see. It says, "Do not weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children. For the time will come when you will say, blessed are the childless women, the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed." I think this is specifically a reference to the judgment that he talked about that was going to be coming, which history points to the AD and the Romans and all that.
Yeah.
When he said mountains fall on us, that's a almost word for word quote of a piece in the Book of Revelations. I think it's chapter 6.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's chapter one
Yeah, because I think for
6.
anybody who's ever read the accounts of Josephus and what went on in that day, I mean it's pretty crazy the stuff that went on, and you just can't get a full appreciation about it without reading an account like that.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think there was any mountains falling down on anybody.
No, I think what it's pointing out is that the seriousness of sin.
Well, yeah, and the whole thing too is that anybody who looks at the way that Jesus talked, you see that just like people today, he used figures of speech. So obviously, I don't think that Jesus was saying, let's see here. Then they will say to the mountains fall. Like people are going to be calling out for the mountains to fall on them. I mean, I guess it's possible, but I think when you look at a lot of these terms and how they're used elsewhere in Scripture, you see that they're representations of people grieving and things like that.
Well, there's a piece in the chapter 6 of the Book of Revelations where it shows how when Jesus is returning, that the people that really are not like on his fan club are shouting, "Hey, we gotta hide! So let's go hide in the rocks and in the dens instead of the mountains." Basically hiding in caves and caverns and bunkers and stuff. You know, so that's what that's a reference to. When you see the end of the world coming, you know, you want to go hide in someplace safe. You know, there's nothing safer than hiding under a mountain. Not even that'll save you, but at least they, you know, they're going to try. And so that's what they do. They basically run for the hills.
Mhm.
And that's what that's a reference to, as far as I can tell.
Yeah,
And
I'm not saying.
I was also thinking of the Romans when the Romans came in 70 A.D. I was also thinking about that too. That was pretty gruesome.
Yeah, I'm not saying that it can't be literal. It certainly could be,
I
but
think-
there's other explanations for it as
I
well.
think it's both. I think he's just putting them both together because he's kind of busy, but he's kind of busy being crucified, so he doesn't have a lot of time.
There is some thought that his words, they speak of judgment, but there is that call to conversion. There is that call to leave behind your old life. And to walk with the Lord. I'm trying to find the wee bit I was talking about, yes. What was the wee bit? I can't find it now. But given that judgment is going to fall on you for your sins, unless, I mean, it is going to be unless you accept Christ. And so there's a call to repentance there. And here he is, struggling up that hill, in so much pain, bleeding, but he's talking to people of repentance. And this is while he is in the process of paying for those sins of theirs. I just think that's so... I can't find the word for
it. Committed, I think, would probably be a good word. I mean, it just it's hard to imagine. You would think like the moment that he was condemned to die on the cross, so that would kind of be like, okay, you've reached the culmination of your life mission here, Jesus. But obviously, I don't think it was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a quite a sort of touching part of the story. That in his pain, he was thinking, obviously, about us and not himself. And the human part of him was suffering greatly. And if he can overcome that, then what more can we overcome? If we try, and if we actually follow him. I'm going to move on to the next one, which is Jesus is crucified. Now, we're going to get into sort of technicalities here, because it's a very bare statement that Jesus is crucified. But what does it mean?
It means he's put on a Roman cross, which is basically like a plus sign, elongated plus sign, and he was placed on there for days, because that's what they would do.
Yeah.
That's what they do for everybody who was crucified in the Roman Empire.
Yeah. And I find myself almost fixated with the technicalities of where to put the nails and the consequences of where the nails are put. I believe that the consensus is it would need to be through the wrist and not the hand, because the hand would tear with the body weight.
Well, what they would do is, and what the Romans would do at least, is they would do the hands and feet, but they would tie you rope-wise, I think it's by like the arms, I think.
Mhm.
And then they'd like put like a wooden block beneath your feet, so your feet wouldn't. So the thing is that most medieval depictions of Christ took away the rope and took away the block because they felt they were necessary, even though if you look at, for example, the images we have, those parts have been taken away, but from good or bad. I mean, I remember once reading a short story where somebody used that as evidence that Jesus wasn't crucified, which was rubbish. It was a depiction.
I'm looking for a picture.
What are you looking for?
Here we go. Images. There are a number of versions of this. I'm trying to find the original. It's not easy to find. I'm all over the place looking for it. Hold on. It's actually in Glasgow. There we go. That's it. It's a very controversial painting. I think I've got the right one now. As I say, there are a number of versions of it. That's a bad one. Right, let's see. View image. Alright, I'm going to just do a wee screen share. See, this is me, my technical stuff. Right, where am I? Screen share, internal display. Share. Right, can you see that? That's Salvador Dali painting. Dash. And you notice something very peculiar about it.
It's an unusual direction of looking down. It's from above.
That is the direction that someone who's been given last rites will see the cross. All about it. And this is why it has been condemned, and it's been called blasphemous. There are no nails.
It must have been a fairly recent one then, because you can buy that thing, No More Nails.
But that is one of my favorite pictures.
No
it's
nails.
by Salvador Dali.
Yeah. No nails.
Right.
And the outcry, now it's hanging in Glasgow somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
There have been protests about it, all sorts, because there are no nails. And the reason that there have been protests about it is because they say, oh, it takes the suffering out of the crucifixion. Well, I think, given what we've gone through so far, we've seen quite a lot of suffering so far. One of the reasons that I was asking about the nails is because from accounts, and I believe from some of the remains that have been found, those who had been crucified, their thumb was across the palm of their hand, like that. And in fact, that is a depiction of the hand that you find in the Turin Shroud, whether it's a forgery or not. It doesn't really matter, because the thumb is across the palm. And the reason for that is, they think, that when you nail through the wrist, you go through a tendon, and it's the tendon that works the thumb. And when you go through that, the thumb is stuck across here. And it's consistent with counts and with remains that they've found. Just thought through that one in there because I think it's quite interesting.
Why it's considered offensive? It's just like from a different angle. So I don't like if you're.
No,
like,
it's the lack of nails.
Yeah,
It's
but
the lack of nails.
it's also
offensive by some.
it's also an artist's rendition.
Yes.
I mean, seriously, to get upset about the lack of nails. There may be a lot of reasons why Dolly, who I love, and with whom I share a birthday, which is not necessarily related, would have shown Jesus without the nails, because the nails weren't the important point. The crucifixion was. The crucifixion would have existed with or without nails.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I was taught that it actually, the way the Romans did it was they put the nails through the wrist, because your hand, it would have torn right out.
Mm-hmm.
I've found the note.
I don't know.
I thought they nailed Jesus to the cross because they ran out of rope.
I don't know the reason of the author of why they made their depiction that way, but there's the popular saying that says that it wasn't the nails that held Jesus to the cross; it was his love for us. And who knows? Maybe the artist had a idea like that he was trying to depict. I mean, without knowing the background and thoughts of the artist, all we can do is speculate.
That's a really good point, Sean. I hadn't thought about that. Yeah.
There's the jokey picture of no more nails.
You see, that for me at this time of year, I find that a tad offensive. But then again, I mean, I don't have a right to be not offended.
No. Sorry about that.
No.
No, it's a good point.
I don't have a right to be not offended. I mean, I live in this modern world. I'm going to see images like that, and usually it's just whoop over my head, and I just leave it, water off a duck's back, because it's not something that I would get wound up about. It's just this time of year when we're actually contemplating the suffering, it has a bit more of an impact on me. I think it's because we are thinking about what we believe that Jesus went through. Whether he did or not isn't the argument here. We're saying here that we believe this, and here are the consequences of the beliefs that we hold. Here is what we have to contemplate. It's not just a case of when we come out with our usual just little rote, he was crucified and died, on the third day he rose again. We're actually looking at the real effects of that crucifixion, the trial and the scourging and the crucifixion, and actually trying to get our heads round everything that was actually done to him, rather than just this, he was crucified, died, and rose again. We're concentrating on the suffering, on the blood. If you see what I mean.
Do you think there's a Catholic thing in there? Because I remember, do you remember Steve McDonough? One of the things I remember him pointing out, the difference between Catholics and Protestants, because obviously he comes from Northern Ireland. Difference between Catholics and Protestants is that the Protestants just have the cross, whereas the Catholics are a bit more morbid and they've got Jesus attached to the cross on the crucifix they'll wear or whatever.
Yeah, it said that the Roman Catholics concentrate on Christ crucified and the Protestants concentrate on Christ risen. But I think that's a bad summary of it. I think there's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah, the Protestants mainly, at least in the beginnings, they were offended at the images of Jesus hanging on the cross.
Mm-hmm.
So, because like you said, they want to concentrate on Jesus ascending, not being beaten to death, and killed, and so yeah, that pretty much summed it up.
Yeah.
That's
But
how
you
I
see, I mean, when I think about it, and I watch some of the evangelicals, preachers, and we keep hearing about, price paid with the blood of the lamb. We're washed in the blood of the lamb, the blood of the lamb, the blood, all the rest of it. That's what we keep hearing. And that's why I think that maybe that's a bit of an oversimplification.
Yeah, I think if in an ideal world that the Protestants and the Catholics would get together and share the image and be like, you have one of each, So
Right.
they're both equally valid images.
Well, and that's the main point of ecumenism, to get together and to talk and to, and there are places in the world where people actually do talk. Here in California, we have the Berkeley. Oh my goodness, I just forgot the name. But anyway, it's an association of various different seminaries and other religious groups, the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, and these are Catholics and Protestants and others that all cooperate and share facilities, share a bookstore, and they actually get along, which is something, if you look at YouTube, you wouldn't think. And there are Catholic seminaries involved in the Graduate Theological Union and Baptist seminaries. So people can talk, and it's a shame when people throw up these barriers to discourse, including lies about what Catholic doctrine is.
Yeah. Well, that's the nature. You get to heaven, there's not going to be, okay, this side's for Catholics, this side's for Protestants. There's not going to be any Catholics or Protestants. It's just all going to be people who believe in Jesus. That's all it's going to be.
And isn't there something in the Bible about, oh, gee, my house has many mansions?
Well, yeah, but no. I mean, that's just saying that we're all going to have, our own mansions to live in. It doesn't mean we're.
No, it
doesn't.
No,
that's not the way that I learned it. It means that there are just different ways of coming to God.
Yeah,
May I chime in?
Sure, Jeff. Fiona's hangout.
I was. I don't know if I'm coming through good or not. I'm not really good at this school. Thank you. I think it was Fiona said something about whether you're a Christian or not. How Jesus suffered. I think I'm an apatheist. I don't care about what's going to happen to me when I die. But the fact that the man was absolutely tortured, and it brought. I was thinking something today about I think what happened in Yemen, where Muslims and Christians were, Muslim terrorists were going to people they saw, and they asked them, "Are you a Muslim or a Christian?" And if you said Muslim, you lived, and if you said Christian, they killed you. Now, it takes a heck of a lot of guts to say, yeah, I'm a Christian, knowing that you just saw somebody shot in the head right before you. And I think Christians in America and in Europe are, and I'm not saying this to be mean, I'm really not, but I think we're kind of soft compared to what Christians have to deal with in other countries. And I hope everybody has a great Easter.
It depends on the individual. I mean, I can tell you right now that if I see someone get shot in the head and someone come and ask me the same question, I would not have any problem saying that I'm a Christian. Because then you're shot in the head and it's over. But if I see someone get tortured, I would probably be a little less inclined to admit it.
Yeah.
The other thing I take into consideration is this. If by admitting you're a Christian you get shot in the head, that's it, you're going. By telling a porky, you live to fight another day. And how well can a dead Christian spread the gospel?
You can't.
Right.
So we keep hearing this, oh, you lukewarm Christians, if you were threatened, you would immediately say you weren't a Christian, you were a Muslim, to save your own skin. But is it to save your own skin? And if in becoming a martyr for your cause, you take yourself out of the picture.
Doesn't that bring up the point of Peter?
Yeah,
Talking about
exactly. Peter.
Yeah.
Well, why would you want to be a martyr for your cause? Isn't it better to live and just believe?
Well, the Apostle Paul worded it very well. He said to die is gain, to live is Christ. No matter which you go, which go left or right in this situation, I mean it's going to be a good choice for God and ultimately for yourself. I mean even if you were weak in faith and someone was going to threaten you with your life unless you lied about being a Christian, and you did lie about being a Christian, Jesus is going to forgive you for that and maybe have you do other things. The thing it just depends on your level of faith at the moment and what God has willed for you. You know, that's.
And it's interesting.
No right or wrong answer. I mean, unlike what the fundies say, there is no right or wrong answer to that question.
I mean, if I said, you know, given that situation with the gun at my head, and I said, no, I'm not a Christian, it doesn't mean I'm denying God. It means I'm telling a pokey to murder this git that's got a gun at my head.
It means you live.
Yeah. I mean, that doesn't mean you are denying God. It's like saying, oh, they told a lie when they said to the Nazis there were no Jews here. Yeah,
Exactly.
they told a lie. But
I'm sure there were plenty of Jews that denied being a Jew so they could survive.
yeah, and plenty of people who lied about the location of Jews to save the Jews' lives.
Exactly.
And I find it very hard to say you must be truthful in that situation.
Well, not only
you
that,
say out your mouth to someone who's got a gun at your head, it doesn't necessarily reflect what's in your heart.
A lot of unnecessarily bad things would happen if people were more or less forced to tell the truth 100% of the time.
yeah. There's even a science fiction story about that, and it doesn't end well. What I was going to say is, I was going to bring up, I don't know how many of you have ever read the play or seen the play Androcles and the Lion by George Bernard Shaw.
No.
I would suggest everyone read it. I would also suggest you read the preface to Androcles and the Lion because it's extremely interesting. And basically Shaw points out that Jesus was a failure because no one has ever been bold enough to try his way. And instead, the crowd cried for Barabbas instead of Jesus, and the crowd has been crying for Barabbas ever since, except in a weird way, Barabbas has stolen Jesus' name. It's a very interesting essay. But the point I wanted to make is in Androcles and the Lion, you have these stereotypical Christians. And, of course, the woman is the best character because Shaw wrote great women characters. You have Androcles, who's the quiet, pious Christian, and for those of you who don't know the story, in the wild, he pulled a thorn out of a lion's paw and then ended up in the Colosseum with the lion in front of him. He's praying, thinking he's going to get eaten, and all of a sudden the lion starts licking him because it's the same lion. But there's also this character of the gladiator who became a Christian, and he has struggles with his violent tendencies. But the best character is the woman, and they're leading them to the Colosseum to be killed. And the centurion guarding them falls in love with the woman. And he tells her, look, I mean, it's okay to be a Christian, but they're going to kill you. I'm paraphrasing, of course. They're going to kill you. I mean, just come with me to the temple, burn a little incense to Jove or something, and then you'll be free. And the woman is very straightforward with him, and I just love this character because she goes, I just can't do that. And she says, if someone tortures me, I'm going to go, oh yeah, I'm not a Christian. Yeah, I'll worship Jove. She goes, but the minute I'm better, I'm going to be a Christian again.
Yeah.
And I think it's a fantastic character. And because that's honest. No one knows what they would do under any circumstances. If if this was Nazi Germany and I were hiding Jews in my home, and the SS came to my door, would I have the courage to say, nobody here? Would I? I don't know. Nobody knows what they do. But the point I love about this woman is she was honest enough to say, well, yeah, I'll say whatever they want me to say.
Mm-hmm.
But the minute I'm better, I'm a Christian again.
Yeah. And I think that's it's an interesting thing to think about. I mean, you can hypothesize what you would do in that situation yourself, but you will never know until you're faced with it. Now, I want to press on because it's after 2 o'clock in the morning here. So we now get to Jesus promises his kingdom to the repentant thief. And I think the word that's really important in there is repentant. And the reason that I see that is because I've noticed quite often on YouTube that a new irregular verb has been formulated. And it's one of those irregular verbs. You know that one where it's, I am an individual, you are an eccentric, he is round the twist. Well, this one is used by certain of the extreme radical fundamentalists, and it goes something like this: I am forgiven, you need to repent, he is a sinner. Because I hear them shout quite often, you need to repent. And I also hear them saying, I am forgiven. And I very rarely hear them say, I need to repent.
Well, Fiona, it's almost like they're saying, I'm a Christian, I can do wrong because I'm forgiven.
This is exactly what I'm saying.
And that bothers me.
Some of them say one's forgiven, always forgiven.
Oh, that I think is a very dangerous doctrine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no kidding.
I can do whatever I want because I believe in God. I'm a Christian, and it doesn't matter what I do because I'll be forgiven.
Well, I mean, here's the example of why
That's
it's
scary.
Here's the example of why it's so dangerous. Because someone who thinks like that could just go out and massacre people because they've been forgiven. Stopping it.
Exactly. I don't like this atheist, I don't like this person, so I should shoot them, but I'll be forgiven.
And
that's damn scary.
If you combine that with the idea that if you are truly filled with the Holy Spirit, you cannot sin, then it means that no matter what you do, it wasn't a sin.
That's right, because God told you to.
Well, you can explain any kind of thing if you use the right kind of logic.
Yeah, but
God's going to judge the intent.
In air quotes.
God's going to judge the intent of our heart, as well as our actions. So, it's not like He's going to judge you and then send you to all eternity in hell because you committed a sin. There's going to be levels of rewards and penalties. It's just not going to be the extreme penalty and the extreme reward at stake.
Yeah.
And for someone to say, I am forgiven, excuse me, please, are you God? I thought God was the only one to do the forgiving.
Yeah.
So if you're going to say, I am forgiving, you're making a really bold and rather blasphemous assumption there.
Yeah. And also, you get this, are you saved? Well, tell me this, when are we going to be judged?
Funnily enough, I was just about to bring up the judging part.
Yes. When are we judged?
I could never get an answer to that. Some told me that when I die, I'd be judged. Others said later.
So how can anybody say, I am saved? Because if they're busy saying that on YouTube, they ain't been judged yet. So how can they know?
That's perfect.
That's Fiona bringing up semantics again.
I hate to point this out, they are being judged, and I judge them to be idiots.
Yeah, but that is something that gets me.
Tells them they're saying that's what they go by. They go by what their book says, what they read out of it, or read into it, and that's what they go by. And then they deny that they're actually getting what they want out of it.
Which kind of turns the Bible into a graven image, does it not?
Yes.
It certainly does. Yeah, you're seeing a bunch of people who.
Of the words, I've said it over and over again, and I get banned and muted and called all kinds of bad stuff for it. It's the spiritual intent of the words, not the words themselves.
Good point.
Yeah.
And yeah,
what-
we are seeing a bunch of Bible worshippers, and that's basically it. And Cliff hit the nail on the head. The Bible is, to a lot of people, apparently a graven image. And I think there's something in the Bible about not doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how many times that's been pointed out to certain people, especially on YouTube and Google+, that you're not actually doing anything but worshipping the book itself.
Well, I got booted out of G-Man's Hangout last night. I was only in there 3 minutes.
Yeah. I saw
Yeah.
that.
I did.
I told G-Man that people have to be vetted by him before he considers them a Christian, and he took offense at that, even though that's exactly what he does.
David, he compared himself to Jesus.
Yeah, that was astonishing.
And I wasn't
He said-
I wasn't saying it. I wasn't saying it in a snarky way. I was just saying it. At least I didn't think I was. I was just saying that this is the fact of G-Man's Hangouts. If you go into his Hangout and you say or do something that he doesn't approve of, then he doesn't consider you a true Christian, which is exactly true.
G-Man absolutely said he justifies judging people because Jesus and God did it.
He actually said that's the whole purpose of him being. I was in a hangout with Andrew Jack, and he came in. And he said that is his whole purpose of being on YouTube is to point his finger at people, more or less. He's saying it's to point out the deceptions of the last days. Well, he's one of them.
Yeah. Can I read a passage here? It was Becky that actually brought this up. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven. We hear that all the time, don't we?
Yeah, it's all about his ministry.
Yeah, so let's read on.
Not
Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name, cast out demons in your name, and done many wonders in your name? Then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. Lawlessness.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, if you look at the comments I left from his Hangout last night, I pointed out that he's awfully quick to pull out a verse from the Bible and ignore either the rest of the verse or the second verse.
Yes.
Yeah, I pointed that out to him too. With the verses, his favorite verses that he likes to point out that there are fake Christians, so to speak. And I said, well, if you read the rest of the verse, it tells you who they're talking about. They're not talking about the people you're talking about.
And one of his favorite verses, the second verse, contradicts what he's saying.
Mm-hmm.
That's why he don't read it aloud. He don't want people to know. It's all about him. It's all about his preaching a quagmire. That's what I call it now. Preaching a quagmire miniseries. And anyway, that's what he's about. He's going to be the one saying those things. Lord, Lord, didn't I this? Lord, Lord, didn't I preach to the choir and all that? And he said that I'm going to be one of those people. And I said, I would never, ever say that to Jesus. If I'm capable of speech, I will say, well, I never did anything but sin. My best thing is nothing but sin. I will never make a boast like that.
I think the most I could probably say is, oops.
Yeah. What I would also want to bring up in relation to that passage is Matthew 25, the judging of the nations. And the really interesting thing about that is that the sheep and the goats will be separated. And then he will say to them, come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you took me in. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to me. And these people are baffled that they have been saved. And they say, but when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and take you in, or naked and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and come to you? And the king will answer and say, assuredly, I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me. And when he then tells the others to depart, they're the ones that are saying, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or naked, or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison, and did not minister to you? And he's saying, inasmuch as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. Those who think they were saved weren't. And those who thought they weren't were. The first shall be last and the last shall be first. That's a really interesting thing for me there. Those who couldn't understand why they were saved were told it was because it was what they did for other humans. And those who were condemned for what they did not do for other humans. And yet they were convinced they were saved.
If I was Christian, I'd say amen.
And that's one of the reasons why if somebody says to me, are you saved? I will say, I don't know. I'm still alive, so I've not been judged. So how can I answer the question that God may know the answer, given that he can know the past and the future and all the rest of it, but he's not told me? Because if God tells you early on in your life, you are saved, it's going to change. Where's the free will in that?
You could basically do whatever you wanted past that point then, couldn't you?
Exactly. And that's why when people say, she's not saved or he's not saved, I sort of look at them with a sort of, huh? Because I think, but they've not been judged yet. How can you know what God's judgment is going to be in the future on this person? And a parallel to that is, I've always said, you never know and understand a person until they've died. Because all the time that they are breathing, they can do something that surprises you. And that's why judgment isn't coming when you're alive. Does that make sense?
Mm.
See, that's the problem. It does.
Ah. Right, okay.
No, it does. No, Fiona, it does. I mean, people, how can I know everybody basically barely in this room by what I hear on YouTube, which is a small segment of your life. How can I judge anybody here and say, well, you're not a Christian, out of maybe 2 hours a day of what or an hour a day of what I hear from you? You can't just take a portion of somebody's life and say, well, that person's not a Christian because I hear what they say on YouTube.
Well, and not only that, it's not just from what they say, it's from what certain people think they should say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This person should say this or they should say that. They don't. Who are you to, again? It's you don't tell anybody what to say. It's baffling.
Well, and not only that, I go back to you've got to think of what was alleged to be from St. Francis of Assisi, which is preach the gospel always, and if necessary, use words.
Yeah.
What means it's the way you comport yourself. It's your behavior. And if you compare certain people to other people, there are some atheists here on YouTube who are preaching the gospel a lot better than some of the theists.
Well, I've always had doubts on religion and God, and to certain people, and I'm not going to mention any names, drove me to the point that Yep, I don't believe anymore, and I don't see their actions as being Christians, and it's not just on YouTube, but it goes through my whole life. I have seen people called Christians that have been the most horrible people that I've ever met, that want to beat me up, slap me around if I don't believe the way they believe, or I don't say what they say, and I'm going to go to hell. Well, fine. I'll take my chances.
Yeah.
And I grew up in an... Oh, I'm sorry, Fiona, go ahead.
I mean, I for a long time struggled with the idea that no atheist is saved. When you take it to the extremes and you think, well, so here's somebody who's done all sorts of terrible things in their life, and then on their deathbed they accept Christ, wallop, straight into heaven. And someone who's never done anybody a bad turn, who has been charitable, who's fed the sick, who's fed the hungry, clothed the naked, ministered to the sick, done all of that, but they're going to burn for all eternity.
I can bring you one step further. What if Hitler in 1934 decided that he heard a broadcast on radio talking about Jesus, and after he killed 6 million Jews and millions of other people, he decided that he was going to accept Jesus? Would he go to heaven?
You see, that's why...
That's odd.
It is. I mean, and I understand.
That's why there's purgatory.
Yeah.
But that's just a construct. Haven't you heard?
I know.
And
I'm in South Mississippi. I don't even know. I can't spell construct.
Where do certain people get off in declaring that someone is or is not saved? And this is, I think, coming to the crux of the matter. Because that thief on the cross, the person who judged him was Christ himself. He's allowed because he's God. But
the way my father told me, the only man that can judge you is God, nobody else.
But where do others get off in judging? Not a true Christian.
No, ma'am.
Or not saved, or the spawn of the devil, son and daughter of Satan. You know, the only one who can know your mind and who can know your heart is God. I mean, sometimes you may not express yourself very well, and what you're trying to say may not come across very well, but God knows what it was you were trying to say. And I would hate to be judged because I misspoke something. That happens all the time, though, when you're communicating with humans. Because, I'm sorry, but quite often I can speak in gibberish, and quite often there are people who just, they don't have the ability to listen in gibberish. If you see what I mean.
Yeah.
As humans, we are not brilliant at expressing ourselves. And we make mistakes. And that's why the judgment has got to be left to God.
Well, and, you know, God is often spoken of as God the Father or God the Parent because, you know, God is, you know, is not a, you know, as we think of God, is not like a human being. And that's another thing. Like, a lot of people who say they worship God really seem to be worshiping Jove or Jupiter or Thor or Odin or something like that because they've got this fire and brimstone, thunderbolts kind of idea. Mm-hmm. But, you know, God is often spoken of as a parent. And so if you have a child and the child does the best they can, and you know that child has done the best they can, are you going to condemn that child because they fall short?
Yeah.
I mean, and that's not, you know, that wouldn't be anything for a pathetic little human to judge. You know, so if someone's an atheist, someone has spent their life examining everything, and they just say, well, I just don't believe. I just don't. And as a lot of people have pointed out, you can't choose your beliefs. How can you imagine that a parent would not say, it's okay?
Yeah.
I understand you did your best. And people might say, oh, well, no, God would never do that. But you know what? You can't say that. And this actually goes back to something that happened under Pope John the 21st, and I promise not to get sidetracked with that. But you cannot put limitations on the works of God. So if you're saying that God could not send an atheist to heaven, God could not declare an atheist saved, you are putting limitations on the works of God, and gee, that's blasphemy.
Yes. Can I just bring something up that suddenly dawned on me? And talking about humans judging humans. Now, I heard something very, very interesting, which had my jaw on the table. And it was someone who was judging all Roman Catholics. And they decided that they were judging all Roman Catholics as not Christians because they think the Pope is Christ.
What?
Who thought that?
Wait a minute. Wait. We'll get there. We'll get there in a minute. Give us a minute. Now, what they based this on was that Roman Catholics say that the Pope is the vicar of Christ, and they say that he is God's representative on earth. Just like all Christians are supposed to represent Christ. Okay? However, what this person was basing it on is that they think that the Roman Catholics are saying the Pope is the representation of Christ.
So this is someone who can't read, basically.
This is someone who has mixed up the two words representative and representation.
My father is a representative of Christ. He's a Southern Baptist. He's a very good man.
Well, there you go.
Here's a question for you, Fiona.
This is the problem. This whole judging on Roman Catholics. Let's leave the idolatry out of it at the moment. But that was one of the main objections that this person gave. That the Roman Catholics say the Pope is Christ because they call him God's representation.
Would this person happen to live in New Jersey and ask people questions?
Yeah, it's still pretty polluted in New Jersey. It affects the brain.
Yeah, it was the last night's hangout. But that is a small error. And what bothers me about that is based on that error, all Roman Catholics are judged. And that's why the judging should be left to God, because all humans are fallible. So as I said, Jesus could judge the thief on the cross because he is God.
Fiona, did you know that you're also an atheist?
Yes, she is. I know. He said you're also an atheist, Fiona.
Am I?
Yeah, because you hang around with atheists too much.
Right. So you're really secretly an atheist.
Yeah. Well,
welcome to Illuminati.
I have been condemned for daring to talk to, visit the house of, sleep under the same roof as, and eat with atheists.
Well, gee, who did Jesus go to?
A prostitute. The people that tax people. Jesus went and talked to the lowest of the low on the planet. That's who he hung out with.
But apparently his followers today are not supposed to do that.
No, because you don't want to hang out with those people. Right. You got to preach to the choir.
And as I said, the thief on the cross. Jesus was hung on the cross. He was hung on the cross, flanked by two thieves. And so the humiliation, being associated with criminals, all the rest of it.
I don't think people know what the term spreading the gospel actually means, because if you can't spread it to people that don't already know it, what are you supposed to do?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and one thing I wanted to add too is I think, if I'm correct, if I remember correctly, the person that Fiona is talking about also thought that the Pope was Jesus, or thought he was Jesus, or Catholics thought he was Jesus, because of this individual's own personal definition of the word vicar.
Oh, good grief.
Yeah. It's nothing like having illiterates make.
Yeah,
It
that
makes
is a big problem, and it's the one thing that really does. I mean, and I know it shouldn't let me. I know it shouldn't let this do what it does, but it makes my blood boil when I see this judgment on others based on complete and utter ignorance of the English language. And yet, the same people with the complete and utter ignorance of the English language think that they can sit and read a King James Bible with the type of old language that's in it and understand it, when they don't at the moment understand see, spot, run.
Yeah.
Sorry, I went off on a rant there.
Or even the difference.
Very well done.
Or even the difference between the words specified and specific.
Yes. I must admit, I think representative and representation, that is a whopper when it comes to that.
Yeah.
So, but that, getting back to the thief on the cross, that thief accepted Jesus. That thief said he is innocent. He has done nothing wrong. Whereas the other mocked Jesus. If you really are the Messiah, get down off the cross, etc. In other words, you know, perform a circus trick for us. And that also makes me think of when people ask you trick questions, or they try and catch you out. They have a hidden agenda. They expect you to jump through hoops for them to prove your faith.
Just to trip you up.
Yeah, that is.
How does one prove one's faith? I mean, seriously.
How does someone prove their unfaith, for that matter?
Well, I've been told I have to prove I'm a Roman Catholic. How?
I would just recite the Nicene Creed and tell them to screw themselves.
I've done that. No, I've done that. That didn't work.
I know. I mean, that is prove you're a Catholic. I don't know. I wasn't aware that you get tattoos or branded or something like that.
Yeah, I have a tattoo on my arse that says I'm a Catholic. I mean, what are you gonna do?
But that means you're going to hell.
Here's the question: Can you, if you chop off a limb, will it have, you know, Catholic written in like a stick of rock?
Of course.
Probably. But see, that is very like what the mocking thief on the cross did.
Mm.
If you truly are the Messiah, then you get down off God, etc. And that, I don't think that's a very good way of trying to ascertain who someone is or what they believe.
And not only that, when you look at Catholicism, it's a pretty big tent.
Yes.
Just exactly what does he want you to prove? You know, knowing or whoever this person is, perhaps he expects you to worship idols and pray to Mary as co-redemptrix, which, by the way, is a term a lot of people misunderstand and is not part of Catholic doctrine.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't think he'd be satisfied if for you being a true Catholic unless you did all those things that actually aren't Catholic, given his predisposition. It's or you know, it's his strange version of Catholicism. How can you prove you are something he doesn't understand?
I think it would be far more interesting to see if G-Man can prove he is a Christian, because he doesn't act like one.
Yeah, and in his last hangout, there were people who tried to point this out to him gently, and they got kicked because he doesn't want to hear that. He doesn't want to hear G-Man. It's all about, yeah, okay, we got to G. I'm sorry, I was gonna keep names out of it, but when you have someone who says you have to do these things to be a Christian, and then someone else come and they give you a lot of biblical quotes, often out of context, and then someone else comes along and says, yeah, but you're not being very Christian, and let's talk, and nicely says, well, let's talk about this, and let me give you the biblical quotes, and then they get kicked.
Yeah.
You know, having a discussion is fine, but have an open discussion, not just a discussion over the things you want to think you want to believe. And I grew up in a world where, you know, I knew people of a lot of different faiths. I knew a lot of Jews, and some were conservative, some were Reform, and some were Orthodox. I, you know, grew up going to Catholic school. My mom's best friends, one was a Episcopalian and the other was a Presbyterian. We had, well, actually, excuse me, there was another one who was a Lutheran. I grew up around people with a bunch of different variations of faith, mostly Judeo-Christian, and nobody ever said, oh, they're going to hell because they're a Methodist. Oh, my step-grandmother and my stepfather's family was all you know, Methodist, except for his family, which were all Reformed Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is not Mormon. But nobody ever pointed to somebody and said, oh, they're going to hell because they believe differently. I wasn't taught that in Catholic school. I find this idea that there has to be this narrow path, which a lot of people emphasize, this narrow path, to get to God, very strange. And apparently the people who are saying this are on the narrow path.
Becky, I know a pastor in Georgia, and he knew from day one. I contacted him. He was on Fox News. He got his YouTube channel shut down because he was talking about ISIS and how Christians were being killed. I called him up and I told him straightforward and said, you know, I'm an apatheist. And I've known this guy now for about 7 months. You know, not one time he has told me, you know what, Jeff, you're going straight to hell if you don't believe what I say. He has been one of the most kindest human beings, and he adopted a kid from China, a baby from China, and he is just an awesome human being. He's not a jerk. And what did my mother say? You get more flies with honey than vinegar. It's that simple. It's that damn simple, and I think some of the fundamentalist Christians, they want to slap you upside of the head and just say, you will become a Christian or I'm going to kick your ass. And it's insane that Jesus was not... I don't think Jesus converted anybody and say, hey, join me now or I'm going to beat the crap out of you.
Yeah, I agree. And as a matter of fact, there was an article, and I'm going to look for the link for it right now, about how conservative Christians would not have liked Jesus. Of course, what they mean by that basically is that, you know, fundamentalist Christians would not like Jesus because of, oh, here it is. Yeah, why conservative Christians would have hated Jesus. It's a good article. I'm going to put it in the chat here, and I'll put it on the outside, too. Here's the link.
Yes, because he was kind to hookers, kind to the tax collectors, he was kind to the drunkards, he was kind to the drug addicts, he was kind to people that needed him. Jesus, and this again coming from an apatheist, Jesus came for the people that didn't know him. He didn't come for the you know, the people that knew him.
Yeah,
he came for the people that did not know what his message was. That's the people he hung out with.
Jesus
and I do remember. Oh, go ahead.
Jesus did not come to preach to the choir.
Thank you.
Exactly. And if I remember correctly, again, there's another quote about he who is without sin
Cast the first stone.
Yeah.
Right.
And the phrase preaching to the choir is a byword for an exercise in futility.
Why would you preach to somebody? Why would you preach to somebody that already knows your message?
Yeah, I mean the other way of saying it is preaching to the converted.
Yeah,
You're
what's the
wasting
point
your
of
time.
that? What's the point?
You didn't really think that he actually thought about that ahead of time?
No, of course he did, Clifton, you heretic.
Because if you're not already a Christian, the message is not for you.
Mm.
But that's arse over tit. I mean, you don't preach to the converted. You're supposed to preach to the unconverted. But
Bingo.
But preaching doesn't mean forcing them down the path. What you're
Show
supposed
your
to do,
show your faith by your actions.
Yeah,
not
tell
your
them
words.
the basics. But one of the things that I think is being missed, and it's certainly in the last, let's say, 30 years, is that what is the need now for Christians to go out and spread the gospel? Because when they were told to do that, we are back in the days where you're wandering about on a camel or a donkey with the danger of it getting barbecued on the road to Damascus.
Pre-Google.
Yeah, exactly. And then suddenly we have got the internet, we've got the world at our fingertips. We've got every translation of the Bible at our fingertips. I use Bible Gateway because I can go to whatever version I want with a click. What is the need for Christians to go out there and tell the story of Christ when it is available for anybody who wants to read it? And I think the way where Christians would go out there to spread the message is not to actually preach the gospel and to tell the story, but to get people interested enough to read it for themselves.
Here, Fiona, here's a good way for Christians to go spread the message of God. Feed the homeless.
Yep.
And don't say, I'm giving you food in the name of Jesus. Just feed them.
Yep.
And then let the homeless people say, why are you doing this? God told me to. And then leave it at that. And if they ask you questions, well, tell me about God. But if,
yeah,
it seems the fundamentalists are just, here's some food. I'm going to give you some food in the name of Jesus. But if you don't listen to what I'm going to say, I'm not going to give you the damn food.
Yeah, I think that's a mistake.
Yeah, I was taught that was immoral.
When I was at school. Of course it's immoral.
Yeah, in Catholic school they said you don't do that. You don't you don't force people to go to a sermon before you feed them. You feed them. You make yourself available, and if they want to talk, then you talk. You're there. You're available.
Absolutely.
And you don't condemn them if they come up to you and they want food and they come up to you and say, well, I hate Jesus. I think Jesus is awful. I think the Catholic Church is the whore of Rome. You just say, would you like more potatoes?
Thank you. Oh, man, absolutely.
Yeah. I think the worst one I heard of recently was a church in America where they had a sprinkler system to stop the
that's
sleeping in the
nasty.
That's an interesting story. That is, and this is part of a much larger story. This was actually the Archdiocese of the Catholic Archdiocese of San Francisco. When this was discovered, Catholics went ballistic.
Yeah.
And the Archdiocese got in a lot of trouble. The current Archbishop in San Francisco has made faux pas after faux pas after faux pas. And he's new. So obviously he's going to make mistakes, and he keeps having to pedal backwards to undo the crap he's doing. And so he's been in a lot of trouble. So hopefully he'll learn. But yeah, that was just horrible. And the only good thing that's come out of it is the awareness. I mean, I know that in the UK there have been stores that have put these like spikes and things outside the store so the homeless can't sleep there.
Oh
And-
my
and-
God.
This is horrible, but these are things that when they happen, at least they bring awareness to the problem.
Yes.
And trust me, I think the Archbishop of San Francisco is going to be getting a phone call, if not a very stern letter from the Vatican,
I was
because
just
he's
reading it
been
from Italy,
fucking
yeah.
up all over.
Yeah. So to me, when we were talking about Jesus promising his kingdom to the repentant thief, the thief hadn't. Jesus didn't preach to the thief on the cross. He didn't need to. The thief accepted him
By his actions.
as Christ.
Now here's a question.
And there was no condemnation of, well, you've sinned, so start, that was it.
You're going straight to hell because you didn't believe in me. He didn't say
Here's a
that.
question for you.
Yeah.
Just from an objective point of view. If I was in his position, I might decide, to repent just to be on the safe side.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what desperate people do. They know they're going to die. They know they're not going to get off that thing. That sounds like the act of a desperate person to me.
Well, it could be, but the way you could also read the Bible is that Jesus, being God, knew his heart.
Mm.
Yeah.
But yeah, he could have just said, "Yeah, of course I repent. Why not?"
I think we should move on to the next bit because we're going to be here forever on this.
Well, we're just going to finish. We'll just put
Oh.
one little thing in, the judging part, which is, I do remember when the 3Rs Gang thing first started, I went into that pre-trial hangout fast. And I did try to preach them their own words, something I don't believe it myself, but certainly the idea behind it is reasonable, which is Matthew 7, which is, judge not others, lest you be judged yourself.
Yes.
Ooh.
And it's like, with thy judging, you will be judged. So in other words, you put someone else's feet in the fire, you're putting your own feet in it.
Yeah. And I think that's something that not enough of us actually consider. Now, moving on to the next bit. Jesus entrusts Mary and John to each other. Because
Never understood that.
it's to do with the status of women of the time. He's giving... as a woman, you would need somebody to look after you when you were older. And you would expect your children to do that, especially your firstborn. Jesus was Mary's firstborn. She's now lost her firstborn.
This is where he's saying, Mary, this is your son?
Yeah.
All right, yeah. I never understood that.
Yeah. And that is to ensure that Mary is cared for. His mother.
I was never told that.
Yeah, I mean, Jade will know more about this. She's better in the history than I am. Much better in the history. But, I mean, even nowadays, in many cultures around the world, the reason they've got such a high birth rate is because they've got such a high death rate. And in their old age, the parents have to rely on their children to provide for them.
Yeah. Remember, at that time there was no welfare state, no pension service.
Yeah.
You brought up your children, and they were the ones that looked after you. And of course, life expectancy wasn't terribly high then anyway. 40 to 50 would be a normal lifespan.
Yeah, and of course, the other thing that tells me is that even hanging on that cross, Jesus thought of his mother.
Wow.
He was thinking about her physical long-term future. And he's hanging on that cross. And what I want to emphasise here, and I think it comes in with the next station of the cross, which is number 13, Jesus dies on the cross. In crucifixion, you suffocate. And it's to do with the position that your arms are held in, and because you're hanging forwards, you can't inflate your chest. Now, yes, they had a little sort of slopey platform for the feet, but remember, the feet are pouring blood from the nails, so it's slippy. So they were given a little peg to sit on, tiny little peg. And every now and again they could hoist themselves up with that little peg to get the breath. But it was exhausting. Absolutely exhausting. And the peg was too little to actually support their weight anyway, with any comfort. But the more that they used the peg, the longer they would take to die. Now, it was only when they reached the stage where they were so exhausted they could no longer use that peg to move themselves up, to take the strain from the chest, would they actually stop breathing. And for some that could take days. And in that position, Jesus thought of the welfare of his mother. And she's at the foot of that cross watching.
Which is quite brave of her, I think.
I think as a mother, you would need to be there.
No
couldn't-
words.
To be with them.
Yes.
To watch
for
them
the
through their passing.
comfort of the child, for the comfort of your offspring. If you turned your back and walked away because it was too difficult for you to watch it happening, how much worse would it have been if it was happening to you? You wouldn't turn your back on your child if they were in a hospice and dying of cancer because it upset you too much to watch. You would stay with that child through the whole thing.
And even men dying in war of horrible wounds still call for their mothers.
Yes. And so for Jesus to not be calling for his mother, but to be looking out for her well-being.
Yeah.
And in saying, this is your son. And entrusting the care of his mother to someone else. And all the while he's up there gasping, trying to breathe, and given the scourging that he'd had at the pillar, he was in a worse way than most when they were crucified. Because remember, every time he lifts himself up on that, he's scraping that raw back on the upright of the cross.
Complete with splinters.
Yeah. And when you consider that, that's when it becomes quite upsetting to think about. Especially the relationship between the mother and the child. But he was there for Mary, and Mary was there for him. And that's why I get annoyed when I hear Mary being dissed.
Yeah, me too.
Because she, as his mother, agreed to go through this when God first told her. She knew what was in store. And yet she said, I'm the handmaid of the Lord. She accepted all that heartache. Could any of you do that?
I doubt it.
I
don't think I'd have that strength.
No. I couldn't do it. When I looked at my little 3-month-old, 6-month-old, 1-year-old, 2-year-old, 3-year-old, little chubby hands with little dimples still on the knuckles, etc. When I watched him sleeping, there is no way I could have agreed to that. No way. I had to watch my child go for surgery when he was 6 months old. I had to hold him in my arms while he was anaesthetised. That nearly destroyed me.
Imagine how hard it would be for a mother to know that the child was destined for something while still growing in the belly, for that matter. Did she know before? I forget. Did she know beforehand, or was she effectively told this guy was destined for great things or something?
No, you had all the various prophecies of the Messiah.
Right.
And so she would know all of that. And in fact, we're now just coming to one of the bits that I think is rather crucial. Jesus dies on the cross. And this bit is rather interesting because I have a tale to tell. In that recently, someone, in explaining the agony that Jesus went through, declared that Jesus carried that cross while every bone in his body was broken. So we come to the death of Jesus on the cross, and we have, Father, forgive them, they know not what to do. And then it is finished. And then because the Sabbath is approaching, they break the legs of the two thieves.
So why?
I'm going to get to that. My primary school teacher told us all it was because they would take them down off the cross and it was so they couldn't run away. No, it wasn't. If you break their legs, they can no longer raise themselves up on a little peg.
They can't breathe anymore.
They suffocate. That's why they break their legs.
Oh, I see. So it's going to be the Sabbath. We don't want to do any work. Let's make sure they're dead early.
Yeah. But Jesus was already dead. And so they pierced his side with the spear, and blood and water came out. And it says that this was done and it fulfilled the prophecy of not a bone in his body would be broken. Do you see the problem we've got now?
Mm.
Yeah, just slightly.
We have someone teaching, actually preaching this, that Jesus carried the cross while every bone in his body was broken, which would completely nullify one of the prophecies, which confirms his identity as the Messiah.
Someone who sets themselves up as being a teacher.
Not only that, how can somebody carry a cross while every bone in their body is broken?
Yeah. And not only that, it doesn't say any. It says the opposite in the Bible, that not a single bone of his body was broken. And these are the people who keep going on about sola scriptura, reading the Bible literally, complaining that things aren't biblical, and yet by going outside the Bible, they have negated one of the prophecies identifying Jesus as the Messiah.
Is this the same
person?
Well
done that, man.
Are we talking about the same person?
No. It's someone who considers himself to be a teacher.
Teacher.
And that, to me, is one of the worst mistakes I've heard in a long time, because of the significance of it. If you take away one of these prophecies that identifies Jesus as the Messiah by teaching such an egregious nonsense, how does that help? I mean, call me daft, but given that they're supposedly so based in evidence and all the rest of it, why are they knocking their own evidence out?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, we all know that the part of the story where a spear is used has become legendary. Was it Longinus was supposedly the Roman centurion that pierced his side with the sword, but that is not in the Gospels. I think that's one of the Apocrypha. But that in mythology, that spear has become known as the Spear of Destiny. And in fact, Indiana Jones was looking for it. You know, it's so woven through our culture, even in secular culture, i.e. Indiana Jones. How could anybody miss the significance of that?
It is a bit of a bad one, isn't it? It's if it wasn't quite so significant, it'd almost be like it's not adultery if she gives you permission.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But
there's nothing wrong with owning slaves.
Oh, well,
there's nothing wrong with owning slaves. And you know what? There's also nothing wrong with beating a slave.
Yeah. Apparently, what we see, this is the one that got me, that it's okay to beat a slave, that it's right, it's acceptable to beat a slave as long as it's not a sin. In other words, it's right if it's not wrong.
I know, I love that.
Wait.
How is physically assaulting someone, how is causing someone injury not a sin?
Well, the same person said this is what you would do with children.
Oh.
Yeah.
And Fiona, I forgive you for cheating on me.
Why do I have a feeling that child was beaten slightly too much?
Oh my goodness.
You mean maybe about the head?
Yeah. But that is why I think I really wanted to bring up, or to certainly be mentioning Jesus dying on the cross. And the significance of the blood and the water coming out. Well, actually, interesting thing here. You obviously know that if you get a spear poked in your side, you're going to bleed. But if that spear going between the ribs pierces the pleural cavity, then the pleural fluid will come out, which is pretty much like water.
But not only that, I mean, I suppose the whole reason for doing it in the first place is to make sure they're actually dead and not faking.
Not only that, if you do that, that's what you call a pneumothorax.
Yep.
And that is when in ER they have to, quick, thoracotomy tray.
Yeah.
Because you rely on a reduction of the pressure inside the chest cavity by expansion of the rib cage and the drop of the diaphragm. So you increase the volume around the lungs, which drops the pressure around the lungs, and that's what draws the air in because the lungs expand. If you've poked a hole in that, you don't get the pressure differential. You cannot breathe.
May I ask a question?
Uh-huh.
What is the chances of piercing somebody through the rib cage with a spear at that height?
Pretty good, I would think. He got up a ladder. I mean,
the way I was taught that Jesus was on the cross and the soldier was on the ground, he had a long spear.
I don't think.
Like in one sudden thrust, he put the spear through, and I'm assuming that Jesus did have a rib cage. I'm not being facetious. I mean, I'm asking an honest question.
Jeff, I would assume, and I think it's a fairly safe assumption, that since he was a soldier, he knew where all the parts were. Soldiers, even in those days, were taught how to spear someone and how to get through ribs and things like that.
Yeah.
I actually at one time studied this.
These are questions I never could get answered. Have faith. That's the way it is. Don't ask questions.
Right. Well, I did study somewhat at one time of Greek warfare, and how the Greeks were trained, and they were taught to thrust and how to identify where the ribs were, and
They knew the anatomy and all that. Okay.
Yeah, they knew the anatomy. Yeah, they did.
All right.
Remember,
Okay.
quite a lot of our medical knowledge, even today, stems from the time back then where they would literally gut people alive to see how things worked. I mean, this was done on slaves and prisoners of war, right?
Yep.
So if they wanted to know, let's say, how an arm worked, right, they would just cut open the skin and basically skin the arm and see what happened. So, I mean, a lot of the things we know today comes from really atrocious actions, but it's quote unquote worth it. Yeah, I guess you can say, because even though it was horrible, right?
Yeah.
It has benefited humanity in the long run. So it's not excusing the actions, but it's not like nothing good has come from it.
Well, like I said, all I was ever told was, it happened that way. Don't ask questions. It's in the Bible.
I think we have to ask questions, otherwise we end up with...
you end up like me.
Yeah. But the thing is, I mean, going back to what Alpha just said, skinning your arm, that would put a bit of a crimp in your day.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would...
Just slightly. They also use prisoners of war for target practice and things like that. So it's not beyond comprehension to think that, well, they did understand anatomy and where to thrust. I mean, we do the same thing with soldiers today. You teach them where to shoot, and even police officers, when they go through training, are taught to aim toward the center of the body and things like that, how to shoot, and
Yeah, or like me, when I went through medic training in the Air Force, we used pigs because anatomically speaking, we're almost identical.
Yeah, and they use them for surgery practice.
And legs.
And they use them for surgical practice too. Yeah.
Yeah, the only real difference is that they have slightly larger hearts and lungs.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, and I'm not sure how far back that practice goes, but I'm just speculating. I wouldn't be surprised if they could or knew about that back then as well, because all you need to do is gut a human and gut a pig and see that on the inside we're fairly similar. So teaching people how to stab, where to stab, and how to effectively kill a person with the least possible effort, it really doesn't require all that much effort.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I know.
And another thing I'd like to point out is a lot of our depictions of the crosses are inaccurate because they have them too high up in the air.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like the soldier needed a really super long spear to reach.
Well, that's what I was taught, Becky. That that the Roman soldier was down there, and the spear was like 18 feet tall, and
no, yeah. See, that's no.
That's what I was taught. I mean,
I understand that. I understand that, but that goes against the historical. Well, it's
just like learning how can you have a 12-foot spear and just poke somebody and kill them exactly.
If you look up historical weaponry, you'll see that like spears throughout history has actually been much shorter than a lot of people think they have been. So when used for warfare, because I mean, you imagine the weight of an 18-foot long wooden pole with metal at the end.
Yeah.
Well, these are the things that I'm asking now because I never got an answer then. So.
Yeah. Well, see, these
it's perfectly fine.
We end up getting into all these various apologetics and blah 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 on YouTube. We don't actually talk about the really basic questions that people have. We're all too busy shouting that it's a load of marsh gas. No, it's not. I have evidence. No, you don't. And I think it's a bit like evolution. I've always said, don't diss evolution if you don't understand what it is. You cannot say it is wrong if you don't know what it's saying. It's like saying, well, I completely disagree with what Mr. Blogs said yesterday in the village shop. when you have no idea what Mr. Bullock said? How can you be in a position to disagree? And so...
You can't.
Exactly, and that's why I think it's important that those of us that do believe explain what it is we believe, not why, what it is we believe. Otherwise, we're going to end up in the same position with all these misunderstandings about the Roman Catholic Church coming out from the extreme fundies. That they will misunderstand it, and they will claim that the Roman Catholic Church does X, Y, and Z when they don't do it at all. And it's just a whole... There's enough straw men there to have the most enormous bonfire you've ever had.
Fiona, I don't give a damn what people believe, if they believe in God or not. I don't care if people pray to a Pepsi bottle cap. If you're kind to a fellow human being, that's good enough for me. I don't. Well, you don't believe in God? Oh, I hate you. Or you believe it? You're a Christian? I hate you. Or you're a Jew? I hate you. Or you're a Muslim? I hate you. I don't care what people believe in.
Yeah.
If you're nice, that's fine with me. I really don't give a rat's ass. I really don't. And
the ones that frustrate me are the ones that when you say, that, oi, don't do that, they'll say, oh, look, you're persecuting me now.
Yeah.
I wanted to bring up... If you challenge them, you're a bully. If you run away, you're a coward. And I'm just like, I don't care what you believe in. You're kind. You're a good human being. Man, I don't care. I wake up at 8 in the morning and get off at work at 4 in the afternoon. You are a good person if you're a good person. I don't care who you are or what you are. If you don't want to kill me, we're good.
I don't care either. And I said that's the way I was raised. I find this, what I see here on YouTube, very strange because honestly, I never ran into this much crap like this until I got on YouTube. And I've only been on YouTube maybe 4 years, and I'll be 65 in May. Of course, I grew up in California, but I'm completely unfamiliar with this attitude. It's just odd. But one of the things I was going to point out is Jeff brought up sort of a really important point, because he was told that the spears were like 8 feet tall, and the irony of that is that comes from medieval and Renaissance depictions of the crucifixion. It doesn't come from the Bible. It comes from outside of it. And yet we have a lot of these people going, Bible only, Bible only. You're not supposed to look outside the Bible. But we have to look outside the Bible for a historical understanding of what crucifixion was. How did they do it? And as Halsoy pointed out, most spears were only about, a couple of meters long at that time.
Yeah, 2 meters, so between 6 feet 5 and 6 feet 7-ish. Most spears.
Not only that, to add to your list, Jade, also the society and the format that people lived, the cultural aspect. Just look at the Christianity stuff. Sorry, just look at the Bible stuff. You've got the difference between the Jewish society and the Roman society. And there are different cultural laws between them.
And that's a distinction not often made by certain people here on YouTube when they're talking about what some of the Gospels say and what Paul is saying and so on and so forth. They're not making the distinction as to who is being addressed. But you cannot. There is no way that you can be completely Bible only. And I've seen people here on YouTube get upset when they go, oh, you're going outside the Bible, and then they themselves turn around and go outside the Bible.
Well, not only that, of course. So, at the time the Bible would have been written, society would have been very different, and it wouldn't have been hard to sort of say, I think it was something like 800 years, almost nothing happened, no changes whatsoever, really, culturally and society and things like that, and yet suddenly there was a big change, but so in a context of way back, 1,000 years ago, there wouldn't have, the way people did things would have been culturally understood. But today, culture is very different than it was then.
Yeah.
So you go 1,200 years ago, you go 2,000 years ago, and culture is a little bit different. But even so, still that context is missing.
You have to take into account a little bit of the chilly messiah known as Icy Jesus.
Icy Jesus.
Icy Jesus?
Icy
oh my goodness.
Oh, come on, get Jesus out of the freezer, for goodness sake.
He's cold.
As opposed to the other
cold.
One. Isn't the other version a bit like the Norwegian blue? It's an exegesis.
Yes.
Oh, bad form.
Oh, but the thing is though,
and it's got to be proper.
Words.
Excuse me, it's got to be proper.
This is the thing. This is what does my head in. Is they learn a fancy new term and suddenly they're an expert. I don't care. You call it Fred for all you want to call it. Doesn't matter what it's called. Doesn't matter that you know the big word for it. When you get things like, do you know the difference between exegesis and eisegesis? Yes or no? I'm just curious. And so, just knowing those words and understanding why textual critics use that doesn't mean you actually understand the text itself. It means you've learnt a couple of new big words. And if you can pronounce them, then that's a bonus. It's not necessary.
Well, I live in Biloxi, Mississippi, and I can barely say both of those words. But to the Christians in the room that are going to celebrate Easter, I sincerely hope that you have a good Easter. And I'm not going to celebrate it, but I hope you do, and have a good time and enjoy yourself.
Well, listen, even if you're not celebrating Easter for any religious reason, you can always just celebrate the fact that you get chocolate.
And Easter eggs.
I was going to say, Jeff, how dare you diss the Easter Bunny? The Easter Bunny is going to be so upset. It's bad enough.
You out your mind, woman. I'm from South Mississippi. We shoot the Easter Bunny when he comes in my neighborhood. What's the matter with you, woman? This woman done lost her mind up in here. Easter Bunny coming on?
They have an Easter Gator. That's what you have.
We got the Easter Gator, Easter Bunny up in my hood.
I actually have sitting right here next to me, and unfortunately the camera isn't working at the moment. I could show you. I have an Easter Bilby. Because in Australia they don't have Easter bunnies, they have the Easter Bilby because bunnies are bad.
That's right, yeah.
Bunnies eat everything up, so they have the Easter Bilby. If you don't know what a Bilby is, it's a cute little critter, and you should look it up. So I have an Easter Bilby right here.
Does it taste good when you cook it?
I don't know.
That's my.
You sound like
South Mississippi. Our zoos, when we have animals in our zoos, we have the animal, and then we have a little caption underneath it. How you cook it, how you eat it.
It's people like you that are the reason why that people didn't know about giant tortoises for, I think it was about 80 years or something like that. Basically, the voyagers that were bringing them back would eat them before
they were good
because they were hungry.
Cleft Jumper, they tasted like chicken.
I was going to say you sound a lot like my relatives for whom no squirrel is safe.
Nope. The oldest hangout's going to hell.
No squirrel is safe.
Squirrel.
Yes.
Somebody would call you a bogan because if you've ever seen Rise of the Guardians, he's Australian.
Yeah. By the way, you do realise that we're going to be called blasphemous because we were considering the Stations of the Cross and all the rest of it. By the way, we got 3 thumbs down.
3 people hate squirrels.
Yeah.
Well,
there was G-Man, G-Man, and G-Man.
Yeah, the last one we're going to look at is Jesus is laid in the tomb.
Right.
Now,
this is the one I'm going to focus on myself.
he has to be taken down from the cross, and his body is given as something. See, I'm not quite sure what the common practice was when criminals were crucified, what was done with their bodies. So, Becky, you're bound to know.
Well, from what I understand, which is I don't understand a lot, is they were handed over to their families.
Right.
And if they weren't handed over to their families, I think they were handed over to whatever ethnic group they belonged to.
Right. And so Jesus was handed over to Joseph of Arimathea. Now, so I heard somewhere that suggested that Joseph of Arimathea was a relative of his.
Yeah, according to tradition, he was a cousin of sorts.
Right. But cousin is quite a loose term.
Yeah, it is a very loose term. Either he or his wife, who is sometimes, again, according to tradition, called Mary. But Mary or Miriam was a very popular name at that time. So either Joseph or his wife were cousins of Jesus. But yes, you're right. That's a loose term. It could mean, in the sense, they just simply belong to the same tribe.
Yeah, that's something that I was wondering about. Because the reason I'm interested in it was just because all we really know about him is Joseph of Arimathea. And Jesus is laid in the tomb.
Right.
And big stone is rolled in front.
And Joseph was a very wealthy and important man.
Mm-hmm.
So if there probably was no objection whatsoever if Joseph came forward with Mary and John, because Mary and John were now Jesus' family. Well, Mary always was Jesus' family. If Joseph were to step forward and say, I'm taking him, pretty much no one would have said boo to Joseph of Arimathea.
And I mean, that must have been really unpleasant. Because you've got this absolutely brutalized body.
They wrap them up fairly early on, though, I think.
I know, but even so...
Somebody's got to wrap him up.
Well, okay, they probably didn't just wrap him up either, because just like in later centuries, they would wash the body. Do you remember the frankincense and myrrh, folks?
Yes.
Wash the body?
They would wash the body.
That's the gifts of the three wise men.
Frankincense and myrrh?
Yeah. Three wise, this is what links the nativity to the crucifixion.
Right.
The three wise men brought gifts for washing Christ's body.
Right.
For when he was dead.
Oh gosh, it's a bit like so is this the equivalent of my dad's aftershave?
Yeah.
Oh, stuff like he got when I was like 16 to 25 or something like that, and he's never ever used the stuff.
Well, this is these are herbs, and these are Well,
expensive.
They're very expensive, and I've actually looked up. Frankincense is the resin of a particular kind of tree. If I'm correct, I may be a little off, that only grows in certain areas, I think around Yemen. I don't remember exactly. But you have to like pierce the tree and let the resin come out and collect it. And so it's very expensive. But these two substances were used to clean bodies to remove the odor.
Wow.
It's also called olibanum. And it's an aromatic resin. It's obtained from the tree of the genus Boswellia in the family Burseraceae. Oh, there you go.
Right. So they would have taken his body down, they would have washed, and by the way, the women would have washed it.
Yes.
His mother, Mary of Arimathea, if that was her name, and Mary Magdalene, most likely. There may have been others. We don't know. Just because they weren't mentioned doesn't mean they were there. The women would have washed his body because this was tradition. And by the way, this was tradition still in many parts of this country and in the UK not that long ago. Women would wash the body and cleanse it, and then they would wrap it in clean linen. Oh, I don't know if they used linen back there, but I think they did, didn't they? Because linen is made of flax. I'm not sure. But linen is traditional, at least in this culture. Yeah, that one I don't know about back then. Sorry.
Wouldn't washing the body, I mean, since Jesus was scourged, I mean...
It would have been nasty.
Yeah.
Yes. In other words, as these women who loved him, including his mother, would have been washing the dried blood that would be sticking in the wounds and scab. It's pretty horrible to think about. I mean, just think about what they did. They washed and cleansed.
Kind of like the cat of nine tails. I'm sure the whips were worse than that.
Yeah, and so the women would have. And again, this is not in the Bible, but this is what happened back then, and even happened even again, as I said, in our culture, in our Western culture, not that long ago, if a prisoner had been hanged, he was released to his family, and they would have washed his wounds and cleaned him up because, they kind of, your bowels go and your bladder goes too.
Yeah, but being hanged is different from being flogged.
Yeah, I know, but that is gross. So imagine this. Yeah. So imagine how.
And that's
right.
What
it also
to be all sorted. I mean, that's why I'm saying it must have been very unpleasant, and that's part of the humiliation of the crucifixion.
Yeah. And again, he's like Fiona was kind of saying, this part isn't actually in the Bible, but this is part of the culture. Everything isn't in the Bible because, as Fiona was saying lately, there are things that would just be understood at that time.
Yeah.
There wouldn't have been any need for Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Peter, whoever, Paul, whoever, to write down that the women washed the body of Jesus because that's what always happened.
Yeah.
And this is also why you do need to go outside the Bible. You do need to understand the culture, because when you stop and think about this, it's just that this was Jesus, a man they loved, and he was a mess. And they washed it. It must have been horrid to think of Mary.
It had to be a bloody mess. It was a horrible, bloody, disgusting mess.
Yeah. And it's not only did they used to do it, but they still do it. I mean, you only have to look at when some Jewish person, or for that matter, person, they basically wash the body and they wrap it up, and it's then buried usually.
But Cliff, when you say just wash the body, you're thinking like you're taking a bath, but when you say washing the body of Jesus after he's been absolutely destroyed, that had to be an absolute damn nightmare.
Well,
and
bear in mind that even today,
every single wound.
Bear in mind that they still do this today in places like Palestine, and someone may have had bombs dropped on them.
Oh, and I'd like to point out that Cliff said something that I'd forgotten. This is still done in Jewish culture here in the United States. I had forgotten about that. A number of Jewish cultures, especially I think more the conservative ones, still do this. They still wash the bodies. This has been part of Jewish culture for a very long time. It's been part of other cultures as well.
It's a great part. We get the undertaker to do that, not the family.
It's a great part of the symbolism of Judaic history. Anyway, I mean, the whole washing of feet is an example of that.
Yeah.
That's
humility. That is humility, to wash someone else's feet. That's one of the things, a tradition in the Catholic Church. One day
and the Pope just did that.
Where the priest washes the feet of certain members of the congregation.
I could never understand doing that.
Yep,
it's a tradition.
I could never put my place to do that.
It's to show that he is just a man.
Humility, yeah.
That's all it is. But one of the things I was going to just go back to a little bit is, given what the frankincense and myrrh are used for, you imagine that being presented to a brand new mother sitting with her brand new baby.
Do you think she knew?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Do you really think so?
Yes, because you remember that we have all the prophecies of the Messiah, including the one that not a bone in his body would be broken.
Mary's life must have been hell.
Yes, because she
Her life
knew.
must have. Do you think that Mary knew that her son was going to be killed?
Yes, because that was what was prophesied for the Messiah.
My God! Wow.
She went through his whole lifetime,
Knowing that her son was going to be killed.
Yeah, she could look down on this sleeping toddler, knowing what was in store for him, and knowing
That's torture.
Knowing that somewhere she had the frankincense and the myrrh.
For her son to be cleaned because he died.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I cannot believe that.
Yeah. And the thing is that
I love you, but I cannot. I cannot. That's just torture.
because
I should
remember,
shut up.
the angel told Mary, and all she had to say about it was, "I'm the handmaid of the Lord," i.e., I'll do it.
Wow.
And the thing is that, yes, she was. I mean, this wasn't forced on her. She was willing.
Oh yeah, I understand that.
And of course, when you now take into account that, you see just what Mary gave up. That's why she is held in high regard. She's not worshipped, by the way. I had to get that in there.
Yeah.
But that's why she's held in such high regard, because she put the whole of humanity before her own son.
So you really believe that Mary knew that her son was going to be killed?
Yeah, because she would know. Remember, Mary was Jewish, so
Right.
she would know all the prophecies of the Messiah.
Okay, yeah. Yep,
So when
that's
God
okay.
tells her that she's now going to be the mother of said child who will become the Messiah, she knows what's in store because of her religion.
Wow.
And this is also, I think you can understand why Fiona and myself and other people get a little upset when you hear some certain of the fundies just dismiss Mary as if she isn't important at all.
Yeah.
And I'd like to point out, by the way, that the sort of anti-Mary part of Protestantism really doesn't have much to do with the Bible or the Protestant religion per se, as much as it has to do with the incredible misogyny that existed at the time of the Reformation.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not biblical based at all. The real sort of anti-Mary misogyny actually comes from the culture of the time of the Reformation. And not the entire Reformation either, because remember, Luther started the whole thing, and Lutherans have a reverence for Mary, or at least some of them do, because I knew some. It has more to do with people like Calvin and so on and so forth.
You've just made me think of Calvin and Hobbes.
Calvin.
Suddenly, my brain went straight here.
You're going straight to hell. That's
I
the
love
last
those two.
bit of
Yeah.
hell.
Yeah, can I just talking about going outside the Bible? I heard something absolutely ludicrous, which made me laugh. As somebody mentioned something about Jesus' toolbox, and a reply was given. Wait. Jesus didn't have a toolbox. It doesn't say in the Bible he had the toolbox. Person pointed out he was 30 years old when he began his ministry. He was a carpenter before that. He had a toolbox.
Well, if he was a carpenter, I'm sure he did.
Yeah, exactly. See, when you first say it, it sounds like really daft. But then you realise that it actually is rather sensible. And to say, well, he couldn't have had a toolbox because the Bible doesn't say he had one,
Oh, you kidding me?
That's what. Yeah.
Who told you that?
That was. I'm trying to think who that was.
Jesus, are you serious? Jesus didn't have a toolbox because the Bible said he didn't, or is never in the Bible.
Yeah, because somebody had mentioned about the toolbox of Jesus, to which somebody had replied, Jesus didn't have a toolbox. And this is the thing. This is why you have to go outside the Bible.
Grief.
You really do. You've got to remember that, yes, we concentrate on his ministry.
You could say that Jesus didn't breathe because doesn't feel or any other Christian in the room, did it say Jesus actually breathed?
Bingo.
Did Jesus go fishing? Not fishing. Okay, that's a bad example. Piss off.
Jason wants,
Piss off. All right. Because I mean, did Jesus go fly a kite?
One of Jason Burns's proofs that Jesus was real was that they found archaeological evidence of fishing in the place where Peter came from, and Peter was a fisherman, so therefore.
Jason Burns has been proven not to be able to sit down properly. Thank you, Fiona.
Yeah.
That was bad.
Yeah, but I mean, when you get to this level of it must be in the Bible, otherwise I'm binning it.
Did Jesus watch HBO? It's not in the Bible.
As somebody said a couple of weeks back, and it's a quote which should go down in infamy, you must believe everything that Jesus said and everything that he didn't say.
Oh, God.
I'm still trying to work that one out.
Spit on my...
You know, I mean, if I've got to believe everything he didn't say, then he didn't say that angels are made of pink jello. So does that mean I've got to believe that angels are made of pink jello? This is the thing. Quite often, what we hear is people open their mouth and they let their belly rumble, and they haven't engaged their brain. You know, and all that happens
is... No, Fiona, you're wrong. You must believe in things that I don't say. What's the matter with you, woman?
But you understand why... I mean, this has been a really good conversation. Although it's Stations of the Cross, we've actually covered a lot.
I'm sorry. I've added humor into your serious conversation.
No.
It's been fun. I've learned a lot, really.
See, I'm really pleased you have. And I think this is something that's important. Now, I'm sure there'll be people out there who will accuse us of having sat in this room discussing the equivalent of how many angels can dance in the head of a pin. Or, you know, sitting discussing how long a fictitious spear was. But what we're trying to do is explain what our beliefs are.
We've talked about real subjects.
Yeah, and also is getting away from the textual criticism and getting down to the nitty-gritty.
I don't see anybody saying that I hate you and you suck and you're garbage and I hate you and nothing like that. I mean, you know, I'm not a Christian, but it's been a great conversation. I've enjoyed the heck out of it.
Have you? Good.
No, shut up.
No, please. Because it's there are a lot of things, I mean, that unless you actually sit down and think about them. Like...
Well, I've learned. I didn't know frankincense and myrrh was used to clean bodies. I didn't know...
And now you understand how significant the gifts of the three wise men were.
I didn't.
And
never
how
taught
that ties the nativity to the crucifixion. And that is... I mean, you don't give new mothers embalming fluid for their babies. You know, it's... And yet, that's what happened. It's quite...
You see, but I don't believe it. I don't believe in it, but I can see where you do.
Yeah.
You know.
And it also in explaining the beliefs, then you can
Sure.
understand more where I'm coming from,
Sure.
I think. Because if you don't make some of the connections that I make, then you're not going to understand some of the things I say. If I explain those connections to you, then we're communicating better after that.
Absolutely.
I think that's important. And I mean, the only reason I've got into this whole thing is because this is science, and I'm sick of religion being used to deny science. And I'm absolutely sick to the back teeth of Christians being made out to be sort of anti-science numpties. And the first thing to get across is, look, here are the fundamentals of Christianity. And so far, nothing that we've spoken about tonight involves evolution or creation. None of it.
Well, I don't care. Again, a broken record, but what people believe in is fine.
Mm-hmm.
As long as they're good human beings. And
yeah,
people have to bring up, well, what makes you a good human being? What is your basis on that? And all the rest of the questions, and it's just the argument over and over again.
Yeah.
I don't know. It kills me.
Yeah, I'm just going to basically take us off here now. I think we've discussed everything.
I think we have solved the entire world's problems.
There's one last thing, and I think you should finish off. What does this weekend mean to you?
Well, the important day is Sunday, the resurrection. But you can't have that without the crucifixion first.
Mm-hmm.
And if you concentrate solely on the resurrection, you forget the price that was paid. And if you concentrate solely on the price that was paid, then you forget about the victory. And by actually just tackling the Stations of the Cross, I think tonight we've concentrated on just how much was paid for us. Now, I'm not going to say because we are all miserable, filthy sinners. That's not what I'm going to say. It's because we're human. We can't live up to the same standard as the divine. But we can attain that level with Christ because of the sacrifice. And that's what it's all about. It's raising us above our own humanity. And that, I suppose, ties back to this idea of original sin. We're humans. That's not to excuse any sins at all. It's just pointing out that that's just us. We're not divine. And we can't be with the divine unless we're raised above that level.
Fiona, you're a sweet lady. I wish more people were like you. You do Christianity a good thing, and I hope that you have a good Easter.
Yes. Well, I'll just say to everybody, I'll use Dave Allen, and I'll just say I've really enjoyed tonight's conversation. It's been really good.
Yes, ma'am.
And may your God go with you.